The camera was already rolling when Bruce hit him. Not the scripted hit. Not the choreographed hit, the one they'd rehearsed 4 times that morning with the pads on and the angles marked in tape on the concrete and the director sitting in his folding chair saying closer, closer, again, again. Not that hit. The other hit. The one nobody planned. The one the stuntman asked for. The one that came from Bruce's right hand at a speed that the camera operator later said he didn't track through the viewfinder. He felt the camera shake from the impact, felt it through the dolly handles, and when he looked at the gate he wasn't sure he'd caught it because the movement was shorter than the shutter interval and a shutter doesn't know what it missed. The stuntman's name was Jerry. Jerry was 6'1", 220 pounds. Former collegiate wrestler, not championship level, not the kind of wrestler who makes the papers, but the kind who trains 5 days a week for 4 years and comes out of it with a neck that won't turn past 45 degrees and hands that know how to grip a man and not let go. Jerry had been doing stunt work in Hong Kong for 11 months. He'd taken falls for actors who couldn't fight. He'd thrown punches at actors who couldn't block. He'd worn padding under his costume and landed on crash mats and rolled with shots that were aimed 6 inches wide of his jaw and looked real on camera because that's the job. That's what a stuntman does. He makes the fake look real. Bruce was standing in the center of the soundstage. Bare chest. Dark trousers with a white waistband. No shoes. His feet on the concrete, and I need to stop here and tell you about the concrete because the concrete is important and the concrete is the first thing Jerry talked about when he talked about this, 30 years later, to a man who told it to my father. The concrete was wrong. Not wrong in the structural sense, the concrete was level, the concrete was sound, the concrete held weight. Wrong in the professional sense. Wrong in the stuntman sense. Jerry had worked on soundstages in 3 countries and every soundstage he'd worked on had the same floor, plywood over concrete, or rubber matting over concrete, or at minimum a layer of canvas over concrete. Because you don't put performers on raw concrete. You don't ask a man to fall on raw concrete. You don't ask a man to be hit on raw concrete because concrete doesn't give a body that hits concrete breaks and a broken body stops production and stopped production costs money and money is the thing that floors are about. This floor was raw concrete. Taped marks on raw concrete. Bruce's bare feet on raw concrete. Jerry's bare feet on raw concrete. And the marks, the taped marks that told them where to stand, where to start, where the camera could see them and where the camera couldn't, the marks were close. 6 feet apart. That's 2 steps. That's 1 lunge. That's the distance between a question and an answer if the question is a fist and the answer is a jaw. Bruce stood on his mark. Jerry stood on his mark. 6 feet. Raw concrete. Camera rolling. The director, a man whose name Jerry remembered but my father didn't pass to me, or passed to me and I lost it, the way a link falls out of a chain and the chain doesn't notice until someone pulls, the director was in his chair. He had a megaphone but he wasn't using it. He was using his hand. The hand went up. The hand came down. Action. Bruce's right hand came up. My father heard this story from a man who heard it from Jerry. That's 2 hands between the soundstage and my father's kitchen. 2 hands between the concrete and the coffee. 2 hands between the camera and the cup. The man who told my father was not Jerry. The man who told my father was someone who had worked with Jerry on a different production, years later, in a different country, and the 2 of them had been sitting in a bar after a 16-hour shoot day and the conversation had turned to Bruce Lee the way conversations in the stunt world turned to Bruce Lee, which was, inevitably, eventually, the way rivers turn to the sea. Jerry told the man.
The man told my father. My father told me. I'll explain what my father knew and didn't know.
But first, what happened next on that soundstage? Bruce's right hand was up. Jerry's hands were up.
The camera was rolling. The concrete was under them.
And neither of them was acting. The morning had started with choreography.
6 a.m. call time. Jerry arrived at 5:40.
This was habit, 20 minutes early on every call, every set, every country.
20 minutes early means you see the set before the set sees you. You see the lights before they're hot. You see the floor before there are marks on it. You see the space, the actual, physical, dimensional space where your body will be asked to do things that bodies are not supposed to do, and you measure it. Not with a tape measure. With your feet. With your eyes. With the part of a stuntman's brain that calculates distance and angle and impact the way a carpenter's brain calculates load and span and shear. Jerry walked the soundstage at 5:40 a.m. He walked the perimeter first. Walls, 3 solid, one with a door that opened onto a corridor that led to the lot. Ceiling, high. 30 feet, maybe more. The tungsten lights were already rigged, rows of them, barn doors closed, cables running down the walls like black veins, pooling on the floor near the power distribution boxes. Jerry stepped over the cables. He walked to the center. He stood on the concrete and he felt the concrete through his shoes, rubber-soled shoes, the kind that stuntmen wear on set before they change into whatever the costume department gives them, and the concrete was cold. 6 a.m. cold.
The kind of cold that concrete holds onto through the night and releases slowly through the morning, so by noon the floor is warm and by 6 p.m. the floor is hot and by midnight the floor is cold again. The cycle of concrete. The breath of a floor that doesn't breathe. Jerry stood in the center and looked at the taped marks. 2 marks. His and Bruce's. 6 feet apart. The tape was gaffer tape, gray, 2-inch, the universal language of film sets, the tape that says stand here in every country and every language and every budget level from Hollywood to Hammer to Golden Harvest. Jerry stood on his mark. Looked at Bruce's mark. 6 feet. He'd been briefed. The action coordinator, a man named Han, or something that sounded like Han when said quickly in a loud room, the action coordinator had sat with Jerry the day before and walked him through the sequence. It was a simple sequence. 3 beats. Beat 1, Jerry advances. Bruce retreats. Camera follows on dolly. Beat 2, Bruce stops. Plants. Jerry throws a right cross. Bruce slips it. Beat 3, Bruce counters. Open palm to Jerry's chest. Jerry takes the fall. Backward. Flat. Camera catches the landing. 3 beats. Maybe 8 seconds of screen time. For rehearsals that morning. Pads on for the first 2, pads off for the second 2, camera rolling for the last one. Standard. Routine. The kind of sequence Jerry had done 200 times on 200 sets in 3 countries. The pads were the kind Jerry had seen on every Hong Kong set, thin foam wrapped in cotton, held to the chest with elastic straps. They covered the sternum and the ribs and nothing else. Jerry had worn thicker pads in London. Jerry had worn thicker pads in Rome. The Hong Kong pads were thin because the Hong Kong approach was, the hit looks better when the pad is thin because a thin pad lets the body move the way a body moves when it's actually hit and the actual movement reads on camera, and reading on camera is the only thing that matters. Jerry didn't argue with the pads.
A stuntman doesn't argue with the pads.
A stuntman wears what the set gives him and adjusts internally, braces the muscles, tightens the core, distributes the weight so the impact travels through the body and out the feet instead of concentrating in one place and breaking something.
Internal armor. The kind you build yourself. The kind no costume department can see. At 6:15, the crew arrived. At 6:30, the lights came on. At 6:45, the director arrived. At 7, the camera operator mounted the camera on the dolly and checked the gate and checked the magazine and checked the focus marks on the lens barrel, marks made with a white grease pencil. Each mark corresponding to a distance, each distance corresponding to a position, each position corresponding to a taped mark on the floor. The marks on the lens talked to the marks on the floor. The camera and the concrete were in conversation, and the conversation was geometry, and geometry was the language of the set. At 7:15, Bruce arrived. Jerry saw Bruce for the first time at 7:15 a.m. on a soundstage in Hong Kong, and the seeing lasted 3 seconds, and the 3 seconds told Jerry everything the briefing hadn't. The briefing had said, Bruce Lee. Leading man. Martial arts background. Fast. The coordinator had emphasized fast, not with adjectives, not with superlatives, but with a pause. The coordinator said fast and then paused, and the pause was the adjective, and the adjective was faster than you think. Faster than you're ready for. Faster than the frame rate. Jerry had heard fast before. Every martial arts actor was fast. Every action star was fast. Jerry had worked with fast men. Jerry had been hit by fast men. Speed, in Jerry's professional lexicon, was a number on a scale, and the scale went from 1 to 10, and the fastest man Jerry had worked with was maybe a 7, and a 7 was manageable, and manageable was the word that a stuntman uses when the word he means is survivable. Bruce walked onto the soundstage at 7:15. Not through the main door. Through a side door that Jerry hadn't noticed, a door in the wall to the left of the camera, a small door, a crew door, the kind of door that production assistants use when they're carrying coffee and don't want to walk through the shot. Bruce came through the crew door. He was wearing a white t-shirt and the dark trousers with the white waistband and canvas shoes, the thin-soled kind. Not sneakers, the kind of shoes that are almost bare feet, the kind that let the foot feel the floor the way Jerry's rubber soles didn't. Bruce walked from the crew door to the center of the soundstage. This was the 3 seconds. This was the seeing. Bruce walked 30 feet in 3 seconds, and every step was a piece of information, and every piece of information said the same thing, and the thing it said was, this man is not a 7. The feet hit the concrete without sound. Not quiet, without sound. Jerry was 20 feet away, and Jerry's ears were tuned to sound the way a stuntman's ears are tuned to sound, because sound tells you what eyes can't, sound tells you where the weight is, sound tells you whether the body approaching you is heavy or light, loaded or empty, committed or tentative. Jerry's ears were tuned, and Jerry's ears heard nothing. No footfall. No soul on concrete. No echo. Bruce's feet touched the concrete, and the concrete didn't know. The shoulders didn't move. When a man walks, the shoulders oscillate left-right, the counter-rotation to the hips, the mechanical compromise that bipedal locomotion forces on the human frame. Every man's shoulders move when he walks. The amount of movement varies. Large men move more, small men move less, trained men move least, but the movement exists. It's physics. It's anatomy. It's the price of walking upright. Bruce's shoulders didn't pay the price. Bruce's shoulders stayed level. Perfectly level. As if the body below the shoulders was doing the walking and the body above the shoulders was doing something else, floating, gliding,
translating through space without the mechanical cost that space demands. The shoulders moved forward because the body moved forward. The shoulders did not oscillate. Jerry saw this in 3 seconds. Jerry processed it in the 4th second. And in the 5th second, Jerry recalibrated. Not a 7. Not an 8. Jerry didn't have a number. Jerry had a feeling. The feeling was, the scale doesn't go high enough. Bruce reached the center. Stood on his mark. Looked at the coordinator. The coordinator walked over. The two men spoke quietly, in Cantonese, words that Jerry didn't understand because Jerry didn't speak Cantonese and the words were not for Jerry. Bruce's hands moved while he spoke. Not gestures, demonstrations. Small, quick movements. A wrist rotation. A weight shift. The movement he wanted in beat 3, the open palm to Jerry's chest. Bruce demonstrated the palm strike. He demonstrated it in the air. No target. No partner. Just the movement, the hip rotation, the foot pivot, the arm extension, the palm turning from vertical to horizontal at the last quarter second. The movement was small. The movement was fast. The movement was over before Jerry's eyes found the end of it. Jerry watched Bruce demonstrate the movement 3 times. The first time, Jerry saw the start and missed the end. The second time, Jerry saw the start and saw what he thought was the end. The third time, Jerry realized there was no end. The movement didn't end. The movement arrived. The palm arrived at a point in space, and the arriving was not a stop, not a deceleration, not the gradual bleeding off of kinetic energy that every other strike Jerry had ever seen performed in the air. The palm arrived and was there. As if the movement had no middle, as if there was, before the palm and nothing between them. Jerry recalibrated again. The scale didn't on Jerry's shoulder, one hand on Bruce's shoulder, the physical bridge between the two bodies, the human tape mark that said this close, this angle, this timing. The coordinator stepped out. The director's hand went up. The director's hand came down. Beat 1, Jerry advanced. Left foot, right foot, the standard advance, the walking aggression that action cinema uses to establish the threat, the big man coming forward, the small man retreating, the visual language that says the big man is dangerous without saying anything. Jerry advanced. Bruce retreated. The dolly followed. Beat 2, Bruce stopped. Planted. The planting was, Jerry noticed it, the planting was instant. Bruce was moving backward and then Bruce was not moving. No transition. No deceleration. Moving, then planted, the way a tree is planted, the way a thing that has always been in one place is in that place. Jerry threw the right cross. He aimed wide, 6 inches right of Bruce's jaw, the standard miss, the choreographed miss, the miss that looks like a hit from the camera's angle because the camera is lying and lying is its job. Bruce slipped it. Bruce didn't need to slip it. The cross was 6 inches wide. The cross was already a miss. But Bruce slipped it anyway, moved his head to the left, moved it exactly the distance he would have moved if the cross had been real, if the cross had been aimed at his jaw, if the cross had been the threat that the camera was pretending it was. Bruce slipped a miss as if it were a hit. Jerry noticed. Beat 3, Bruce countered. The open palm. Jerry braced, core tight, weight distributed, internal armor engaged. The palm came. The palm hit the pad. Jerry took the fall backward, flat, controlled, the stuntman's fall, the fall that looks devastating on camera and costs the body nothing because the body knows how to distribute the impact across the shoulders and the back and the concrete in the concrete. Jerry hit the concrete. The pad saved his chest. Nothing saved his back. Jerry's shoulders hit raw concrete and the impact traveled through the muscles and into the bone, and the bone said, "This floor is wrong. This floor will hurt you. This floor does not care that you are a professional. This floor is concrete." Jerry got up, rolled his shoulders, checked the range of motion. Everything worked. Nothing was broken. But the concrete had introduced itself. The concrete had said its name. The concrete had said, "I am here and I am hard and I will be here every time you fall." Again, the coordinator said. Second rehearsal. Pads on. Same sequence. Same 3 beats. Same advance, same retreat, same dolly, same plant, same cross, same slip, same palm, same fall, same concrete. But the palm was different. Not harder. Not faster. Different. The first palm had been a placement, Bruce putting his hand on the pad in the right spot at the right speed for the camera. A professional palm. An actor's palm. The palm of a man who knows where the camera is and what the camera needs and gives the camera exactly that. The second palm was a Jerry didn't have a word for it. Jerry told the man who told my father that the second palm was more honest. More honest. As if the first palm had been telling the truth and the second palm had been telling more of the truth. Not the whole truth. More. A larger fraction of the truth. A decimal place added to the number. The second palm moved the pad differently. The first palm had compressed the pad into Jerry's chest, flat pressure, distributed, the way a hand compresses a pillow. The second palm didn't compress. The second palm went through. Not through the pad, through the space where the pad was. The pad compressed, yes, but underneath the compression was a push, and the push was not flat, the push was directional, the push had a vector, and the vector pointed at a specific place inside Jerry's chest, a place behind the sternum, above the diaphragm, the place where the body's balance lives, the geometric center of a standing man. Jerry felt the vector. Jerry took the fall. Same fall. Same shoulders on concrete. But the fall was easier, not because the concrete was softer, not because Jerry had adjusted, but because the vector had done half the work. The palm had pushed Jerry in the direction of the fall before Jerry had committed to the fall. The palm had started the fall and Jerry had finished it. Collaboration. The actor and the stuntman collaborating on the lie, except the actor's half wasn't a lie. The actor's half was physics. Third rehearsal. Pads off. Jerry stood on his mark. No foam. No cotton. No elastic straps. Just the t-shirt and the skin underneath and the ribs underneath and the sternum underneath and the organs underneath. The architecture of the human chest, unpadded, unprotected, standing 6 feet from a man whose palm had a vector. Half speed, the coordinator said. Half contact. Half. The professional word. The word that means, make it look real but don't make it real. Close the distance to 50%. Reduce the force to 50%. Give the camera 50% and let the camera multiply it by 2 because the camera is a liar and a liar's math works differently. Bruce nodded. Beat 1. Advance. Retreat. Dolly. Beat 2.
plant, cross, slip. Beat 3.
The palm came at half speed and Jerry felt it at full speed because half of Bruce's speed was full of anybody else's speed. Half of Bruce's speed was faster than the fastest stunt performer Jerry had worked with at full commitment.
Half was more than enough.
Half was the sea at low tide, still deeper than you think, still capable of pulling you under, still the sea.
The palm hit Jerry's chest. No pad. Skin and cotton and ribs. Half contact. And Jerry moved.
Not took the fall, moved.
Moved.
His body moved backward, not because Jerry told it to, not because the choreography said to, not because the stuntman's training engaged. Jerry's body moved backward because a force entered his chest and the force was directional and the direction was backward and the body obeyed the force the way a body obeys gravity, involuntarily, structurally, at the level of physics, not choice.
Jerry stepped back. 1 step. 2 steps.
The second step found the edge of his balance. The third step was a recovery, a stuntman's recovery, the trained response, the back foot finding the floor and the core engaging and the body stopping itself before the stopping becomes falling.
3 steps.
From a half-contact palm strike.
No pad. Jerry looked at Bruce. Bruce was standing on his mark. Same position. Same posture.
Same bare feet on the same cold concrete. Bruce's right hand was still extended, not all the way, not the full strike, the half strike, the hand that had traveled 50% of its intended distance and delivered 100% of a message. The message was, the scale doesn't go high enough.
Bruce lowered his hand. Looked at the coordinator. The coordinator looked at Jerry. Jerry nodded.
The nod was the professional signal, I'm fine, I can work, continue.
But the nod was a lie. Jerry was not fine. Jerry was recalibrating.
Jerry was standing on a soundstage in Hong Kong with 3 steps of involuntary movement behind him and a chest that was humming, not hurting. Humming, the vibration of a structure that has been struck at its resonant frequency, the way a tuning fork hums when you tap it, not because the tap was hard but because the tap was precise. Jerry's chest was humming and the humming was the message and the message was, this man's half is your full. This man's half contact is your threshold.
This man's 50% is your 100%. What is his 100%? Jerry didn't know. Jerry wanted to know.
4th rehearsal.
Pads off. The coordinator said, same as before. Half speed. Half contact. Camera rolling. This was the take. The first film take. The camera operator checked the gate. Checked the magazine. Checked the focus marks.
The marks on the lens agreed with the marks on the floor.
The geometry was set. The conversation between camera and concrete was ready. The director's hand went up. Bruce stood on his mark. Jerry stood on his mark. 6 feet. Raw concrete. Tungsten light.
The red light on the camera was on the small red circle that says, this is being recorded, this is being captured, this moment is leaving the present and entering the permanent. The director's hand came down.
Action. Beat 1. Jerry advanced.
The advance was good, the walk was heavy, the shoulders were forward, the intent was readable.
Big man coming for small man. Camera on the dolly, tracking, smooth. Bruce retreated.
The retreat was measured 3 steps back, each step the same length, the feet finding the concrete without looking, the eyes on Jerry's chest.
Bruce was looking at Jerry's chest. Not Jerry's eyes. Not Jerry's hands. Not the fist that was about to throw the scripted cross. Bruce was looking at the center of Jerry's chest, the place where the palm had landed, the place where the vector had pointed, the place where the balance lives. Bruce was looking at the target. Not because Bruce was going to hit it, the choreography was the choreography. The half contact was the agreement. Bruce was looking at it the way a man looks at a thing he knows. The way you look at a door you've opened before. Not with intention. With familiarity. Beat 2. Bruce planted. The planting was the same instant, complete, the tree. Jerry threw the cross. This time, Jerry aimed 4 inches wide instead of 6. Jerry didn't decide to aim 4 inches wide. Jerry's arm decided. Jerry's arm had been trained by 3 rehearsals, 3 instances of Bruce slipping the miss as if it were a hit, and Jerry's arm had adjusted, had narrowed the gap, had moved the miss closer to the hit because the arm wanted the slip to be earned. The arm wanted Bruce to have to move. The arm was negotiating with the choreography. 4 inches wide. Bruce slipped it. Same distance as before. The same head movement, left, exactly the distance required, not a millimeter more. But now the distance was smaller because the cross was closer and the slip was the same, and the mathematics of the miss had changed and the miss was thinner. Bruce noticed. Jerry knew Bruce noticed because Bruce's eyes moved. Not the head, the eyes. The eyes went from Jerry's chest to Jerry's right hand and back to Jerry's chest in a movement that was faster than a blink and carried more information than a conversation. The eyes said, "You aimed closer." The eyes said, "I saw." The eyes said, "Interesting." Beat 3. The palm. Half contact. Camera rolling. The palm hit Jerry's chest and Jerry felt it, and Jerry took the fall, this time a controlled fall, a stuntman's fall, the fall he'd planned, the fall he'd rehearsed, the flat backward landing on the concrete that cost him his shoulders and gave the camera what the camera needed. Jerry hit the concrete. The concrete said its name. Jerry lay on his back and looked up at the tungsten lights 30 feet above, and the lights were hot and the heat was falling on him like slow rain, and the concrete was cold under his back, and the cold and the heat were having a conversation, and the conversation was, "You're on the ground and a man half your weight put you there at 50%. Cut, the director said. Bruce walked to Jerry. Offered his hand. Jerry took it. Bruce pulled Jerry up, and the pull was light. The pull was effortless, but the grip was not. The grip was specific. Bruce's fingers found the bones of Jerry's hand, and the fingers wrapped the bones, and the wrapping was not a squeeze, not a display, not the handshake that strong men give each other when they want the other man to know they're strong. The grip was a reading. Bruce's hand was reading Jerry's hand, the weight, the tension, the temperature, the calluses, the structure. Bruce's hand was learning Jerry's hand the way Bruce's eyes had learned Jerry's chest. Bruce let go. Good, Bruce said. One word. The word was in English because Bruce spoke English to the Western stunt performers, and the English was precise, and the English was fast, and the English carried the same efficiency as the body, no wasted motion in the mouth, the way there was no wasted motion in the feet. Good. Jerry stood. Rolled his shoulders. Checked the concrete's damage. Checked his chest's memory of the palm. Checked the hum. The hum was there. Quieter now. Fading. But there. The director called for a reset. The camera operator checked the gate. The coordinator walked to the marks, pressed down the peeling edges of the gaffer tape. The set went back to 0. The clock went back to the beginning.
In film, time is a circle. You do the thing, you reset, you do the thing again, and each doing is both the same and different. The way waves on a beach are the same water in different waves.
Between takes. The gap.
The space where the camera stops recording and the bodies stop performing and the set becomes a room and the people in the room become people.
Bruce, between takes, was a different kind of still. Jerry watched him.
Jerry had 20 minutes of downtime between the first take and the second setup. The camera was being repositioned, moved from the dolly to a low angle on the floor, the operator lying on his belly on the concrete with a pad under his elbows and the camera in front of his face like a mechanical extension of his skull.
20 minutes. Jerry stood by the wall. Drank water from a paper cup. Watched. Bruce stood in the center of the soundstage.
Not on his mark, the mark was being retaped, the coordinator's hands on the floor, the gaffer tape tearing, the sticky sound of adhesive meeting concrete. Bruce stood near his mark, in the center, and didn't leave the center.
Didn't go to the side. Didn't sit in a chair. Didn't drink water. Didn't talk to the crew. Didn't check a watch. Didn't read a script.
Didn't do any of the things that every other actor Jerry had ever worked with did between takes, the sitting, the resting, the conserving of energy that the next take would require, the human pause that the human body demands between efforts.
Bruce didn't pause. Bruce stood in the center and moved. Not practicing. Not rehearsing. Not running the sequence. Moving. Small movements. Private movements.
A weight shift from left foot to right foot.
A rotation of the wrist.
A turning of the hip, not the full turn, not the technique, a fraction of the turn, a fragment, the way a musician plays 3 notes of a phrase instead of the whole phrase, testing the 3 notes, listening to the 3 notes, making sure the 3 notes are right before the phrase that contains them is played.
Bruce was testing fragments. Jerry watched Bruce test fragments for 20 minutes.
In 20 minutes, Bruce tested maybe 50 fragments.
Maybe more.
Jerry didn't count, Jerry estimated, later, when he told the man who told my father. The fragments were small.
A hand rising. A foot pivoting. An elbow tucking. A shoulder dropping. Each fragment lasted 1 to 3 seconds.
Each fragment was followed by a pause, not a rest, a recalibration, the body processing the fragment, the body deciding whether the fragment was correct, the body making micro adjustments to the fragment and then testing the adjusted fragment and then processing again.
Bruce was editing himself.
The way a writer edits a sentence word by word, comma by comma, the removal of the unnecessary, the tightening of the necessary, the search for the version that is most true. Bruce was editing his body.
Between takes. On a soundstage.
In the center of a room where 20 crew members were adjusting lights and moving cables and drinking tea and smoking cigarettes and doing all the things that crew members do when the camera is not rolling.
Nobody watched Bruce except Jerry.
Nobody watched because nobody knew what they were seeing. The crew saw a man standing in the center of the room moving his hands.
The crew saw an actor warming up.
The crew saw what the crew was trained to see: a performer preparing for the next take, the way all performers prepare, the way all actors stretch and breathe and find their character and do the private things that the public performance requires.
Jerry saw something else.
Jerry saw a man who was not preparing for the next take. Jerry saw a man who was preparing for every take that would ever exist.
Jerry saw a man who was not warming up but refining,
Not building toward a performance but stripping a performance down to its components and examining each component under a light that only Bruce could see and adjusting each component by increments so small that the adjustment was invisible to anyone who wasn't trained to see adjustments, and Jerry was trained to see adjustments because Jerry was a stuntman and a stuntman's life depends on seeing the adjustment that the other man makes before the other man makes it. Jerry saw the adjustments. Jerry saw Bruce shift his weight 1 inch to the left, and the shift changed the angle of the hip, and the changed angle changed the path of the palm strike, and the changed path meant that the palm would arrive at Jerry's chest from a slightly different direction, and the slightly different direction would change the vector, and the changed vector would point at a different place inside Jerry's body. 1 inch. 1 shift. 1 cascade of consequences. And Bruce did this 50 times in 20 minutes. Jerry stood by the wall with his paper cup and watched Bruce edit himself, and the watching changed Jerry. Not permanently, not the way a conversion changes a man or a revelation changes a man. The watching changed Jerry the way a data point changes a graph, 1 new point, 1 new position, the line of understanding bending slightly to accommodate the new information. The new information was, this man is not an actor who fights. This man is a fighter who acts. The distinction is the whole distinction. The distinction is the distance between someone who uses the body to serve the camera and someone who uses the camera to serve the body. The distinction is the difference between a man who moves for the shot and a man who moves for the movement, and the shot is welcome to record it if the shot can keep up. Jerry finished his water. Crushed the paper cup. Set the crushed cup on the equipment cart by the wall. The coordinator called for places. Jerry walked to his mark. Bruce was already on his. 6 feet. Raw concrete. Camera on the floor now, low angle, looking up, the lens seeing what the concrete sees. The red light came on. The director's hand went up. Jerry looked at Bruce. Bruce looked at Jerry's chest. The director's hand came down. Jerry had been hit before. This needs to be said plainly because what happens next doesn't carry its weight unless you understand what Jerry's body had already survived before it stood on that soundstage 6 feet from Bruce Lee on raw concrete under tungsten light. Jerry had been hit by a heavyweight boxer in a gym in East London when he was 19 years old. The boxer was a sparring partner for a man whose name Jerry knew and my father forgot, and I never had. The boxer threw a right hand that Jerry was supposed to catch on his gloves, and Jerry didn't catch it, and the right hand found the left side of Jerry's jaw, and the jaw made a sound that Jerry described to the man who told my father as a drawer closing. A drawer closing. The specific sound. The wooden, sliding, latching sound of a thing slotting into its housing. That was Jerry's jaw taking a right hand from a heavyweight. Jerry went down. Jerry got up. Jerry's jaw worked. The drawer opened again. Jerry had been kicked by a stunt horse in Spain when he was 23. The horse was supposed to rear, back legs planted. Front legs rising, the classic rear, the one that westerns use when the hero's horse sees the rattlesnake, and Jerry was supposed to be standing 4 feet to the left, clear of the hooves, but the horse reared early and the horse reared wide, and the horse's left rear hoof caught Jerry in the thigh, and the thigh turned the color of a plum, and the plum lasted 3 weeks, and the 3 weeks taught Jerry what 1,000 pounds of directed force feels like when it arrives through a 4-inch surface. A hoof. 4 inches. 1,000 pounds. Jerry had been thrown through a breakaway table in Rome that wasn't breakaway. The props department had built the table from pine instead of balsa, and the pine didn't break when Jerry hit it, and Jerry's back hit the pine, and the pine held and Jerry's back didn't, and Jerry spent 4 days in a Roman hospital, and the Roman hospital had marble floors, and the marble floors were cold the way the concrete on the soundstage was cold, and coldness, in Jerry's professional life,
was always the floor. Jerry had been hit. Jerry had been kicked. Jerry had been thrown. Jerry had been dropped and caught and missed and landed on surfaces that were not interested in his survival. This was the job. The job was, put your body between the camera and the consequence. Absorb the consequence. Let the camera pretend the consequence belongs to someone else, the actor, the star, the man whose face sells the tickets. The stuntman takes the hit. The actor takes the credit. The camera takes the lie and turns it into truth, and the truth plays in cinemas, and the audiences believe the lie because believing the lie is why they bought the ticket. Jerry had been hit before. But Jerry had never been hit by something he couldn't locate. This was the thing. This was the thing that Jerry carried for 30 years before he put it on a bar in front of a man who put it on a kitchen table in front of my father who put it in front of me. The thing wasn't the pain. The thing wasn't the speed. The thing wasn't the power. The thing was the location. When a boxer hits you, you know where the hit came from. The fist started here, you saw it, or you didn't see it, but you know where here is because the boxer is standing in front of you and the boxer's shoulder is rotating and the rotation is the telegraph and the telegraph is the location. The hit came from the right hand. The right hand came from the shoulder. The shoulder came from the hip. The hip came from the floor. The chain of force is visible, traceable, a line drawn from ground to fist to jaw. You can follow the line backward. You can find the origin. When a horse kicks you, you know where the kick came from. The hoof. The leg. The hip. The 1,000 pounds of animal that stands behind the hoof. The chain is short and heavy and obvious. When Bruce hit Jerry, and I'm talking now about the half-contact hits, the rehearsal hits, the professional hits that were 50% of what Bruce could do, when Bruce hit Jerry, the hit came from nowhere. Nowhere. Not I didn't see it coming. Jerry saw it coming. Jerry watched the palm leave Bruce's hip and travel through space and arrive at Jerry's chest. Jerry's eyes tracked the palm. Jerry's brain registered the palm. Jerry's body prepared for the palm. But the force didn't come from the palm. The force came from Jerry searched for the word and Jerry didn't find the word and Jerry used a sentence instead. It felt like the floor hit me. The floor. The force came from the floor. Through Bruce's feet. Through Bruce's legs. Through Bruce's hip. Through Bruce's arm. Through Bruce's palm. Through the pad, when there was a pad, or through the air and the cotton, when there wasn't. Into Jerry's chest. Into Jerry's sternum. Into the place behind the sternum where the balance lives. The force traveled through Bruce the way electricity travels through a wire. The wire is the path, not the source. The source is the generator. The generator was the floor. Bruce was the wire. Jerry had been hit by hands and feet and hooves and tables and floors. Jerry had never been hit by a floor that was using a man as a wire. This is what Jerry carried. This is what Jerry put on the bar 30 years later and said, in whatever words Jerry used, words that traveled through the man who told my father, words that lost their edges the way all words lose their edges when they pass through hands. Jerry said, I'd been hit by everything. I'd never been hit by the ground. The man who told my father said that Jerry paused after he said this. The pause was long. The pause was the kind of pause that a man takes when he said the truest thing he's going to say and he knows it's the truest thing and he's giving the truest thing room to stand. The way you step back from a painting. Not because the painting is finished. Because the painting needs space. The truest thing needs space. Jerry paused. Then Jerry told the man what happened between the fourth rehearsal and the moment that changed the reel. The second setup was the low angle. Camera on the floor. Operator on his belly. Lens looking up at two men from the perspective of the concrete's point of view, the floor's eye, the angle that makes standing men into towers and falling men into disasters. They ran the sequence twice from the low angle. Same 3 beats. Same advance, retreat, plant, cross, slip, palm, fall. The camera saw it from below, and the seeing from below changed the sequence, not the movements, the meaning. From the dolly angle, the sequence was a fight. From the floor angle, the sequence was a landscape. Bruce was a mountain. Jerry was a tree falling toward the mountain and the mountain not moving and the tree hitting the mountain and the tree going down. Jerry took 2 more falls on raw concrete. 2 more introductions to the floor. The floor was no longer cold, 9 a.m., the heat from the lights had been falling for 2 hours, the concrete was warm now, the thermal cycle turning, the floor changing its personality from cold indifference to warm indifference. The concrete didn't care about temperature. The concrete cared about hardness. The hardness was the personality. The hardness was the constant. After the second take from the low angle, the director called a break. 15 minutes. Jerry went to the wall. Drank water. Ate a rice ball from the catering table, a small table, a plastic table, set up in the corner with thermoses of tea and a tray of rice balls and a bowl of oranges, the minimal catering that Hong Kong soundstages provided, the food that said, "We will keep you alive but we will not make you comfortable." Jerry ate the rice ball and watched Bruce. Bruce did not eat. Bruce did not drink. Bruce did not go to the wall. Bruce stayed in the center. The same movements. The fragments. The testing. The editing. But this time, Bruce was editing something specific. Jerry could see the specificity because Jerry had now been inside the sequence 6 times, 4 rehearsals, 2 takes, and Jerry knew the sequence in his body the way a dancer knows a dance, not in the mind but in the muscles, the memory of movement stored in tissue instead of thought. Jerry knew beat 3. Jerry knew the palm. Jerry knew the vector. And Jerry could see that Bruce was editing the vector. The palm strike. The hip rotation. The foot pivot. Bruce was adjusting the pivot. Not the speed, not the angle of the arm, not the height of the palm, the pivot. The point of the foot that touched the floor. The place where the wire met the generator. Bruce was adjusting the connection between his foot and the floor. Micro adjustments. 1 degree changes. The foot turning on the ball, finding a different friction, a different purchase, a different relationship with the concrete. Each adjustment changed the hip. Each changed hip changed the arm. Each changed arm changed the palm. Each changed palm changed the vector. The cascade again. The 1-inch shift that moves the mountain. Jerry watched Bruce adjust the foot 6 times. 6 versions of the same pivot. 6 slightly different connections between the wire and the generator. On the 7th, Bruce stopped. Bruce's foot stopped on the concrete and Bruce's body went still, not the between movements still, not the pause before the next fragment still, the done still. The still of a man who has found what he was looking for. The still of the search being over. Bruce's foot was on the concrete and the foot had found its place and the place was correct and the correctness radiated upward through the body, foot to knee to hip to spine to shoulder to head, and the body was aligned and the alignment was visible and the visibility was the signal, this one. This is the version. Bruce looked up. Looked at the coordinator. The coordinator walked over. Bruce said something in Cantonese, short, 3 or 4 words, accompanied by the foot movement, the pivot, the final version, the 7th version. The coordinator nodded. Jerry didn't understand the words. Jerry understood the foot. The 15-minute break ended. The coordinator called for places. The camera was back on the dolly. They were returning to the first angle, the side angle, for coverage. Same sequence. Same 3 beats. Same 6 feet. Same concrete. But Jerry knew the poem would be different. Because the foot was different. And the foot was the generator. And the generator had been adjusted. And the adjusted generator would produce a different current. And the different current would travel through the wire and arrive at Jerry's chest carrying a different message. Jerry stood on his mark. Bruce stood on his mark. 7 feet. Wait, 7 feet. Not 6. The marks had been retaped and the coordinator had moved Bruce's mark back 1 foot. 7 feet now. 1 foot more. 1 foot of additional space between the question and the answer. Jerry noticed the extra foot. The extra foot was a piece of information. The extra foot said, "What's coming next needs more room." What's coming next will travel a greater distance, and a greater distance means a greater force because force is mass times acceleration, and acceleration requires distance and distance requires space, and the coordinator had given the space because the coordinator knew what was coming and Jerry didn't. 7 feet. Raw concrete. Camera on dolly. Red light. The director's hand went up. Bruce looked at Jerry's chest. The director's hand came down. What happened next took less than 4 seconds. Beat 1 started the same. Jerry advanced. Left foot, right foot. The aggression. The walk. The camera on the dolly, tracking. Bruce retreated. 3 steps back. Same length. Same silence. Same feet that the concrete didn't know about. Beat 2. Bruce planted. The planting was different. Jerry felt it before he saw it. Jerry's body felt the difference through the floor. The floor transmitted the planting the way the floor transmits a truck passing outside. You feel it in your feet before you hear it in your ears. Bruce planted and the floor told Jerry, and Jerry's feet heard. The plant was heavier. Not Bruce's weight, Bruce weighed the same. The plant was heavier because the connection was heavier. The foot was connected to the floor differently. The 7th pivot. The adjusted version. The found version. The foot was on the concrete and the concrete knew this time. The concrete felt the foot. The foot and the floor had a relationship now, not the professional relationship of an actor standing on a set, but the structural relationship of a post driven into the ground. Bruce was posted. Bruce was in the floor. Jerry threw the cross. 3 inches wide. Not 4. Not 6. 3. Jerry's arm had been negotiating with the choreography since the first rehearsal, and the negotiation had progressed 6 inches, then 4, now 3. 3 inches from Bruce's jaw. Close enough that Jerry could feel the air between his knuckles and Bruce's skin. Close enough that the cross was no longer a miss pretending to be a hit. The cross was a near miss. The cross was the edge of intention. Bruce slipped it. Same distance. Same head movement. Left, exactly the amount required.
But the amount required was smaller now because the cross was closer and the slip was calibrated to the cross and the calibration was instantaneous. Bruce saw the 3 inches and adjusted the slip to the 3 inches, and the adjustment happened in the space between the cross leaving Jerry's shoulder and the cross arriving at the space where Bruce's jaw had been, and that space was less than a quarter of a second, and Bruce had used that quarter of a second to measure and adjust and execute, and the execution was perfect. 3 inches. A quarter of a second. Perfect. And then Bruce looked at Jerry. Not at Jerry's chest. At Jerry. The look lasted, Jerry estimated, less than a second. A fraction. A splinter of time. But in that splinter, something moved between them. Not a word. Not a gesture. An understanding. The understanding was, "You aimed closer. I know. You want to see it. I know. Show me." The same exchange that had happened with the eyes after the 4th rehearsal, the interesting, but deeper now. The exchange had matured. The exchange had gone from observation to invitation. The eyes were not saying "I noticed." The eyes were saying "I accept." Beat 3. The palm. Bruce's right foot pivoted on the concrete, the 7th version, the found version, the version that had been edited and tested and chosen, and the pivot sent the rotation up through the hip, and the hip sent the rotation through the torso, and the torso sent the rotation through the shoulder, and the shoulder sent the rotation through the arm, and the arm sent the rotation through the wrist, and the wrist sent the rotation through the palm, and the palm. The palm was not at half contact. Jerry knew this before the palm arrived. Jerry knew it the way a goalkeeper knows before the ball is kicked, the angle of the hip, the plant of the standing foot, the direction of the eyes, the 1,000 microsignals that the body broadcasts before the body acts. Jerry read the signals. Jerry's body read the signals. Every signal said the same thing. This is not 50%. This is not the professional hit. This is not the camera hit. This is not the lie. This is the truth. The palm hit Jerry's chest. The palm hit Jerry's chest, and Jerry's chest stopped being a chest and became a door. The palm opened the door. The force went through the door, through the sternum, through the ribs, through the muscles that Jerry had braced, through the internal armor that Jerry had built over 10 years of professional falling, through all of it, through every layer, the way water goes through paper, not around it, not bouncing off, through. Jerry's feet left the floor. Not a step backward. Not 2 steps. Not 3 steps. Jerry's feet left the floor. Both feet. Simultaneously. The concrete that had been under Jerry since 5:40 a.m., the cold concrete, the warm concrete, the hard concrete, the concrete that had introduced itself and said its name and promised to be there every time Jerry fell, the concrete was gone. Jerry was in the air. For how long? Jerry didn't know. The man who told my father didn't know. My father didn't know. I don't know. The duration of the air is lost in the chain, lost in the telling, lost in the 30 years between the soundstage and the bar. What is not lost is the distance. 8 feet. Jerry traveled 8 feet through the air before Jerry's body found the concrete again. 8 feet. From a standing position. From a palm strike. From a man who weighed 138 pounds hitting a man who weighed 220 pounds with an open hand and sending the 220-pound man 8 feet through the air. The math doesn't work. 138 pounds cannot move 220 pounds 8 feet through the air with an open palm. The physics say no. The biomechanics say no. The engineering of the human skeleton, the levers and fulcrums and joints and the limits that those joints impose on force generation, the engineering says no. But the concrete said yes. Jerry hit the concrete 8 feet from his mark. Not the stuntman's fall, not the controlled, distributed, trained fall that costs the body nothing. The real fall. The fall that happens when a body is in the air and the body didn't put itself in the air and the body doesn't know it's in the air until it's not in the air anymore. Jerry hit the concrete with his back and his shoulders and the back of his head in that order, shoulders first, then back, then head, the whiplash sequence, the body's worst-case landing protocol. The concrete said its name. The concrete said, "I told you." Jerry lay on the concrete. The tungsten lights above. The heat falling. The ceiling 30 feet up. The soundstage silent, not quiet, silent. The specific silence that happens on a film set when something goes wrong. The silence that replaces the ambient noise, the humming of lights, the whirring of the camera, the breathing of 20 people, the silence that eats the noise because the silence is shock and shock is hungry. 20 people were silent. The camera operator was silent. The director was silent. The coordinator was silent. The grips, the electricians, the script supervisor, the caterers, silent. 20 people standing on a soundstage watching a man lie on concrete 8 feet from where he'd been standing a moment ago, and the man was not moving, and the not moving was the silence, and the silence was the question, is he okay? Bruce was standing on his mark. Bruce had not moved from his mark. The palm had left his body, the force had traveled through the wire and out the end and into Jerry's chest, and the leaving of the force had not moved Bruce. The wire doesn't move when the electricity passes through. The wire stays. Bruce stayed. Right foot on the concrete, the seventh pivot, the found version, the connection intact, the post in the ground. Bruce was looking at Jerry. Not at Jerry's chest. At Jerry. At the man on the floor. And Bruce's face was, Jerry told the man, and the man told my father, and my father told me. Bruce's face was not triumphant. Not satisfied. Not the face of a man who has just demonstrated something extraordinary. Bruce's face was concerned. Concerned. The face of a man who has done something he knows how to do, and the doing has produced a result he did not intend. Bruce had hit Jerry. Bruce had not intended to hit Jerry this hard. The truth, the full contact truth, the 100% truth, had come out. Not because Bruce chose to release it. Because the sequence had released it, the narrowing cross, the 3-inch miss, the look, the exchange, the invitation, the acceptance. The sequence had built its own momentum, and the momentum had carried Bruce past 50% and past 75% and into the country beyond the numbers, where the thing that Bruce did was not a percentage of a technique but the technique itself, whole and complete and uncompromised. Bruce had not meant to go there. But Bruce had gone there. And Jerry was on the floor. And the floor was concrete. And the concrete was hard. And the silence was 20 people not breathing. Bruce walked to Jerry. Not fast. Not slow. The walk of a man who was crossing a distance that is both physical and moral, the 6 feet between the mark and the body, the 6 feet between I did this and I'm responsible for this. Bruce walked the 6 feet and stood over Jerry and looked down, and the looking down was not the looking down of a victor. The looking down was the looking down of a man who checks on the thing his hands have done. Bruce offered his hand. The same hand. The right hand. The palm that had opened the door. The hand that had read Jerry's bones on the first take. The hand that had been the wire. The hand was extended downward, open, palm up, the universal offer, let me help you stand.
Jerry took the hand. Jerry took the hand and Bruce pulled and Jerry stood. The standing was slow.
The standing involved a conversation between Jerry's back and Jerry's legs and Jerry's head, and the conversations were all about the concrete, and the conversations all said the same thing. You hit concrete at 8 feet from a standing start and you are alive and everything works, and the working is a miracle that you should not examine too closely.
Jerry stood. Jerry looked at Bruce.
Bruce said, and this is the first full sentence that Bruce said to Jerry on the soundstage, the first sentence that survived the chain, the first sentence that traveled from Bruce's mouth through 30 years and 4 hands to my father's kitchen.
That was my fault.
4 words.
Not you weren't ready. Not I pulled back too late. Not the sequence got away from me. Not any of the professional explanations that a man gives when a take goes wrong and a stunt performer gets hurt.
4 words that placed the responsibility entirely inside Bruce's body, my fault. My hand, my force, my failure to stay inside the lie.
That was my fault.
Jerry heard the 4 words. Jerry's body heard the 4 words. And Jerry's body, the body that had been hit by boxers and horses and tables and floors, the body that had been a professional recipient of force for a decade, the body that had calibrated itself to every kind of hit that exists, Jerry's body heard the 4 words, and the 4 words changed the calibration. Because the 4 words were honest. The 4 words were not a performance. The 4 words were not the actor's apology, the scripted concern, the professional regret, the contractual acknowledgement of liability. The 4 words were the words of a man who had hurt another man and knew it and said so, and the saying was the beginning of something. The beginning of the real take. The one nobody planned. The one that mattered. Jerry stood on the soundstage with Bruce Lee's 4 words in his chest, next to the hum, next to the vector, next to the concrete's name, and Jerry made a decision. The decision was not in Jerry's head. The decision was in Jerry's body. The decision was in the chest that had been opened, in the back that had met concrete, in the feet that had left the floor, in the hands that had been read. The decision was physical. The decision was again. Not the choreographed again. Not the half contact again. Not the professional again. The real again. Jerry wanted to be hit again. Jerry didn't say it to Bruce. Jerry said it to the coordinator. The break after the hit was longer than the scheduled 15 minutes. The director had called it, not because the schedule demanded it, but because the silence demanded it. 20 people had watched a man fly 8 feet and land on raw concrete, and the 20 people needed a reset. Not the camera reset, not the mark reset, not the tape on concrete reset. The human reset. The one where the brain catches up with the eyes and the eyes say I saw that and the brain says I don't believe you, and the two of them negotiate until the brain accepts the evidence, and the acceptance is the reset. The director called 30 minutes. Bruce went to the side of the soundstage. Not the wall, the side. The space between the center and the wall, where a folding chair sat with a towel draped over the back and a thermos of water on the floor beside it. Bruce sat in the chair. Bruce picked up the thermos. Bruce drank. This was the first time Jerry had seen Bruce stop. The first time Bruce had left the center. The first time Bruce had sat down. And the sitting was, Jerry noticed, the sitting was not rest. The sitting was a different kind of work. Bruce sat in the chair and his body was still, but his eyes were not. Bruce's eyes were on the concrete. On the marks. On the space between the marks. Bruce was measuring the 8 feet. Bruce was looking at the distance his force had traveled, and the looking was calculation, and the calculation was, I need to control this. Jerry saw Bruce measure the 8 feet with his eyes. Then Jerry went to the coordinator. The coordinator was standing by the camera, talking to the operator. The operator was checking the gate, the small door inside the camera that holds the film flat against the lens, the mechanical truth teller that says the image is in focus or the image is not in focus, and doesn't care about the drama or the silence or the man on the floor. The gate cares only about the geometry of light. The operator checked the gate and nodded, and the nod said, the gate is good, the image is sharp, whatever happened on the soundstage happened in focus. Jerry walked to the coordinator. Jerry spoke quietly, not a whisper, a low voice, the voice that set professionals use when they want to be heard by one person and not by 20. The voice that stays inside the conversation. I want to do it again, Jerry said. The coordinator looked at Jerry. The look was a question. The real one, Jerry said. The last one. I want to do it again. On camera. The coordinator's look changed from a question to a different question. The first question was, what did you say? The second question was why. Jerry answered the second question. Jerry answered it with his body. Jerry stood up straight. Jerry rolled his shoulders. Jerry showed the coordinator the body that had been hit and had survived and was standing and was functional and was asking for more. The body was the answer. The body said, I can take it. The body said, I want to take it. But the body was not the real answer. The real answer, the one Jerry gave to the man in the bar 30 years later, the one the man gave to my father, the one my father gave to me, the real answer was, I wanted to know what it looked like, not what it felt like. Jerry knew what it felt like. The chest remembered. The back remembered. The concrete remembered. The air remembered. Jerry's body had a complete record of what Bruce's full-contact palm strike felt like, and the record was stored in the muscles and the bones and the bruise that was forming on the back of Jerry's left shoulder where the shoulder had introduced itself to the concrete. Jerry knew what it felt like. Jerry wanted to know what it looked like. Jerry wanted to see the camera's version. The camera had been rolling. The camera had been tracking. The camera had recorded the moment, the palm, the flight, the landing, the 8 feet. The camera had seen what Jerry couldn't see because Jerry was inside the event. You can't see the event from inside the event. You can see the fist, you can see the palm, you can see the light above you when you're on your back. But you can't see yourself fly. You can't see the 8 feet from the air. You can't see what 20 people saw because you're not 20 people, you're the one person who was inside it, and inside is blind. Jerry wanted the camera's eyes. Jerry wanted to see himself fly. But more than that, Jerry wanted to see Bruce. Jerry wanted to see the palm strike from the outside. Jerry wanted to see the pivot, the hip, the arm, the wire. Jerry wanted to see the electricity leave the generator and travel through the wire and arrive at the door and open the door. Jerry wanted the complete picture, the picture that his body had one half of and the camera had the other half of, and the two halves together would make the thing whole. I want to do it again, Jerry said. On camera. And then I want to see it. The coordinator paused. The coordinator was a professional. The coordinator had worked on, Jerry estimated, and the man told my father, and my father told me, maybe 40 films. Maybe more. 40 films of coordinating bodies in space, of measuring distances, of putting marks on floors and putting people on marks and making sure the people on the marks did the things the script said and didn't do the things the insurance said.
40 films of controlling the lie. Of making the fake look real and keeping the real from becoming dangerous.
What Jerry was asking was, let the real happen.
On camera. On purpose.
The coordinator paused because the pause was the professional processing the request. The professional said, "This is outside the choreography.
This is outside the stunt plan. This is outside the insurance and the schedule and the agreement between the production and the stuntman's body." But the professional also said, the camera caught it once.
The camera was rolling when it happened.
The image exists. The image is in the gate. The image is on the film.
Whatever happened on the soundstage, the full contact palm, the 8-foot flight, the concrete landing, it was already recorded.
The lie was already broken. The real had already entered the frame.
The question was not whether to record the real. The question was whether to do it again, deliberately, controlled, with Jerry's consent and Bruce's knowledge and the camera's intention.
"I'll ask," the coordinator said. The coordinator walked to Bruce. Bruce was in the chair. Thermos in his left hand. Right hand on his knee, the right hand, the palm hand, the wire hand, the hand that had opened the door.
The hand was resting on the knee and the resting was the same as the sitting, not rest, work. The hand on the knee was the hand thinking. The hand on the knee was the hand deciding whether to do again what it had done by accident. The coordinator spoke to Bruce in Cantonese. Jerry watched from 20 feet away, close enough to see, too far to hear.
The conversation lasted, Jerry estimated, less than 2 minutes. Short.
The coordinator spoke.
Bruce listened. Bruce's face did something. Bruce's face changed. Not a large change. Not the theatrical change that an actor's face performs for the camera.
A small change.
A private change.
The face that a man's face makes when the man is presented with an idea that he has already had.
Bruce had already had the idea.
Bruce had been sitting in the chair measuring the 8 feet with his eyes, and the measuring was not just calculation and the calculation was not just control.
The measuring was curiosity. Bruce wanted to see it too. Bruce wanted to know what the camera knew.
Bruce wanted the outside view of the inside event, the same desire that Jerry had, the mirror of the desire. The stuntman wanting to see himself fly and the martial artist wanting to see himself throw. Two men on opposite sides of the same palm strike, both wanting to see what the camera saw.
Bruce nodded. One nod. Short. The nod of a man who has already decided and is confirming, not deciding.
The nod traveled from Bruce to the coordinator and from the coordinator to Jerry, and Jerry saw the nod and the nod was the answer and the answer was, yes.
Bruce stood up from the chair. The standing was, Jerry noticed, Jerry always noticed, the standing was a single movement.
Not the two-part standing that most men perform, the lean forward and then the rise, the shift of weight and then the lift of weight, the two-stroke engine of getting up from a chair.
Bruce stood in one stroke. The body went from sitting to standing without the intermediate. Without the lean. Without the shift.
The chair was under him and then the chair was behind him and the transition was invisible, the way the transition from before the palm to the palm had been invisible.
Bruce's body didn't do transitions. Bruce's body did states. Sitting was a state. Standing was a state. The space between the states was empty. Bruce stood. Walked to the center. Stood on his mark. The coordinator walked to Jerry.
He said yes, the coordinator said.
But he has conditions. Jerry waited.
He wants to know your signal, the coordinator said.
He wants you to tell him when you're ready. Not the director. Not me. You. He'll wait for your signal. What signal?
Your hands, the coordinator said. When your hands come up, he'll know.
Jerry's hands.
The signal was Jerry's hands. The stuntman's hands, the tools of the trade, the things that catch and block and grip and fall.
Jerry's hands would say ready and Bruce would listen to the hands and the hands would be the contract. Not the coordinator's contract. Not the director's contract. Not the production's contract. The contract between two bodies. The contract that says, I am ready to receive what you are ready to give.
One more thing, the coordinator said. He said, and I'm translating, he said, tell him I'll try to stay at 80.
But I don't promise. 80. 80%. Bruce was offering 80%.
Not 50, the professional number, the line number, the camera number. Not 100, the accident number, the 8 feet number, the concrete number.
80. The number between the lie and the truth.
The number that says, I will give you most of what I have and I will try to hold back 20% and the trying is honest and the holding back is honest, but the promise is not something I can make because the body doesn't negotiate with percentages, the body negotiates with the moment, and the moment will decide.
I don't promise.
Jerry heard the 80 and Jerry heard the not promising and Jerry's body heard both and Jerry's body said, 80 is enough. 80 is the truth minus the damage. 80 is the door opening without the door breaking. 80 is the answer to the question that Jerry's body had been asking since the first half-contact rehearsal at 7:30 that morning. What is this man? 80% of the answer.
Tell him yes, Jerry said.
The camera operator loaded a fresh magazine.
This detail survived the chain.
This detail was one of the details that Jerry told the man and the man told my father and my father told me, and the detail survived because the detail was specific and specific details survive the way specific stones survive a river, the round ones. The smooth ones, the ones that the water shapes instead of destroys. The specific detail was, the camera operator loaded a fresh magazine. A fresh magazine means fresh film. A fresh magazine means, whatever is about to be recorded will be recorded from the beginning of the roll.
No splicing. No continuation. No overlap with the previous takes. A clean start. A new reel.
The camera operator was giving the moment its own film, its own strip of cellulose, its own silver halide crystals, its own chemical memory.
The moment would not share its film with the choreographed takes. The moment would have its own reel.
The operator loaded the magazine.
Check the gate. Check the focus marks.
The marks on the lens agreed with the marks on the floor.
The geometry was set.
The director, and this is where Jerry's account, as it reached my father, becomes less clear, the edges less sharp, the chain losing resolution the way a photograph loses resolution when you enlarge it past the grain. The director either knew what was about to happen or didn't.
Jerry wasn't sure.
The coordinator had spoken to the director, but Jerry didn't hear the conversation, and the man who told my father didn't ask, and my father didn't ask, and I'm telling you what I have, which is, the director was in his chair. The director's hand would go up and the director's hand would come down. Whether the director knew that the thing between the up and the down would be real, Jerry couldn't say. The crew was on the soundstage.
20 people. Same positions.
Lights, cables, thermoses, oranges.
The same set that had been there since 6 a.m.
But the set felt different. Jerry said the set felt different. and the man passed the word different to my father, and my father passed it to me, and I'm giving you different because that's the word that survived, and the word that survived is the word I have.
Different. The set was the same and the set was different. The concrete was the same. The lights were the same.
The marks were the same.
The 7 feet were the same.
But the air was different. The air on the soundstage, the warm, tungsten-heated, cable-smelling air, the air was carrying something.
Jerry said the air was loaded. Loaded. The way a gun is loaded. The way a spring is loaded.
The way a word is loaded when the word means more than the word. The air was loaded with the knowledge that what was about to happen was not choreography.
Jerry stood on his mark. Bare feet on warm concrete. No pads. T-shirt.
The bruise on his left shoulder forming under the cotton, the purple growing, the body's record of the first truth, the first real take, the accident.
This would not be an accident. Bruce stood on his mark. Bare feet on warm concrete. Bare chest.
The trousers with the white waistband. The right foot on the concrete in the 7th position, the found position, the edited position, the position that connected the wire to the generator in the way that Bruce had chosen from 50 fragments in 20 minutes of editing.
7 feet between them. The camera was on the dolly. The operator's eye was in the viewfinder. The red light was on. Fresh magazine. Clean film.
The chemical memory waiting to be written.
The director's hand went up. Jerry looked at Bruce. Bruce looked at Jerry's chest.
Then Bruce's eyes moved up, from the chest to the face, from the target to the man, and Bruce's eyes found Jerry's eyes, and the finding was the question.
Are you sure?
Jerry raised his hands.
Not the stuntman's guard.
Not the choreographed guard. Jerry raised his hands the way a man raises his hands when a man is saying, I'm here.
I'm ready. Come. Bruce saw the hands. Bruce's eyes dropped from Jerry's face back to Jerry's chest.
The eyes were on the target.
The wire was connected to the generator.
The foot was in the floor. The director's hand came down.
Action. No beat 1. No advance. No retreat. No dolly tracking 2 men walking.
The choreography was gone. The 3 beats were gone. The sequence that had been rehearsed and rehearsed again and filmed again, the professional sequence, the planned sequence, the ensured sequence, the sequence was gone.
There was only beat 3. The palm. Bruce moved.
Bruce moved and Jerry saw the movement and Jerry's eyes tracked the movement and Jerry's brain registered the movement and Jerry's body prepared for the movement, and the preparation was insufficient because the preparation was built on the previous data, the half-contact data, the 50% data, the data that the body had collected from 6 rehearsals and takes, and the previous data was a map of a country that no longer existed. The country had changed. The borders had moved. The scale had expanded. The 80% was a different country from the 50%, and Jerry's map was useless. The palm traveled from Bruce's hip to Jerry's chest in a time that Jerry could not measure. Not fast. Jerry had stopped using the word fast after the 3rd rehearsal. Fast is a word for things that move quickly within the range of expected speed. Fast is a word for a car that goes faster than other cars. Fast is a word for a man who runs faster than other men. Fast describes the top of a scale. This was not the top of a scale. This was a different scale. The palm arrived at Jerry's chest and the palm opened the door, the same sternum, the same place behind the sternum where the balance lives, and the door opened wider this time. The 80% opened the door wider than the 100% accident had opened it. Wait.
That can't be right. That was Jerry's problem.
That was the thing that Jerry carried.
The 80% felt like more than the 100%. The controlled version felt larger than the accident. How?
Because the accident was scattered. The accident was the full force traveling through an uncontrolled path, the 100% force going everywhere, hitting the chest and the ribs and the muscles and the air and the floor and the 20% silence.
The accident was a bomb. A bomb is powerful, but a bomb is wasteful. A bomb throws its force in every direction, and the force that goes sideways and upward and backward is force that's lost. The 80% was not a bomb. The 80% was a bullet.
The 80% was the same force minus 20%, yes, but the remaining 80 was aimed. The remaining 80 was channeled. The remaining 80 traveled through the wire and out the palm and through the door and into the specific place, the specific, exact, chosen place behind the sternum, above the diaphragm, the geometric center, and the 80% hit that place and only that place, and the hitting of only that place was more than the hitting of every place.
The bullet is smaller than the bomb.
The bullet does more damage.
Jerry's feet left the floor. Again. Both feet. Simultaneously.
The concrete gone.
The air again. The ceiling again. The tungsten lights again. The warm falling heat again. The body in the air again.
But this time, Jerry was ready.
Not for the force, you can't be ready for a force you can't locate.
But for the flight.
Jerry was a stuntman.
Jerry had spent a decade learning how to be in the air, how to be thrown, how to fall, how to turn a disaster into a landing. Jerry's body had protocols for the air. The first time, the accident, the protocols hadn't engaged because the body hadn't expected to be in the air.
You can't run a protocol for an event you don't expect. This time, Jerry expected.
Jerry's body was in the air and Jerry's body knew it was in the air and Jerry's body engaged the protocol, tuck the chin, round the shoulders, distribute the landing across the upper back, let the body roll, let the momentum carry through the roll and dissipate into the concrete instead of concentrating in one place and breaking something.
Jerry flew.
Jerry rolled.
Jerry landed. Not flat rolled. The stuntman's landing. The trained landing. The landing that costs the body something but not everything.
Jerry's shoulders hit the concrete and Jerry's body rolled, and the roll carried the force through the back and into the hips and through the hips into the legs, and the legs found the floor and the legs stopped the roll, and Jerry was on his back on the concrete and the concrete said its name, but the name was quieter this time because the roll had taken some of the name's volume.
Jerry lay on the concrete.
The distance between Jerry's mark and Jerry's body was 6 feet.
6 feet. Not 8. 80%. Not 100. The math worked. 80% of 8 feet is 6.4 feet. Call it 6. The math worked.
The force was proportional.
The distance was proportional.
The 80% was exactly what Bruce had said, 80% of the full truth, controlled, channeled, aimed, the bullet instead of the bomb. Bruce had kept his promise.
Bruce had said, I'll try to stay at 80. But I don't promise.
Bruce had tried.
Bruce had succeeded.
The evidence was in the distance, 6 feet instead of 8, the proportional proof, the mathematical receipt. Bruce had measured his own force and delivered 80%, and the delivery was exact, and the exactness was the most frightening thing that Jerry had experienced on the soundstage.
Because exactness means control.
And control at 80% means awareness at every percent. And awareness at every percent means Bruce knew, at every moment, in every fraction of the movement, exactly how much force was in the wire.
Bruce could read his own electricity. Bruce could meter his own current.
Bruce could stand at the generator and say this much, and the generator would produce this much, and not a what more and not a what less.
The man was not a fighter.
The man was not an actor.
The man was an instrument.
The camera operator removed the magazine. This is the part where the reel becomes the story. This is the part where the film, the physical film, the strip of cellulose coated in silver halide crystals that had been exposed to light, the film was 16 millimeters, not 35 millimeters, not the theatrical gauge, the smaller gauge, the documentary gauge, the gauge that says this was not planned, this was captured, 16 millimeters. The gauge that news cameras use. The gauge that truth uses when truth can't afford 35 millimeters. The operator held the magazine. Looked at the coordinator. The coordinator looked at Bruce. Bruce was standing on his mark. Bruce had not moved from his mark. Bruce's feet were on the concrete in the same position, the seventh pivot, the post in the ground. The palm strike was over. The flight was over. The landing was over. The 6 feet were measured. And Bruce was standing on his mark looking at the magazine. The magazine was the answer to the question that both men had asked. Bruce wanted to see it. Jerry wanted to see it. The camera had seen it. The camera's memory was inside the black metal box. Can we watch it? Jerry asked. Jerry asked the coordinator. The coordinator asked the director. The director, and here the chain again loses resolution, the photograph enlarging past the grain, the director either agreed immediately or agreed after a pause. My father's version had the pause. The pause was the director calculating. We have the scheduled takes, we have the overage take, the schedule is behind by 30 minutes, the budget is behind by the cost of a fresh magazine, the production is behind by the silence and the 30-minute break and the deviation from the plan. The director calculated. The director's calculation included a variable that my father's version preserved, curiosity. The director wanted to see it too. The director had been in the chair. The director had seen the man fly. The director wanted to see it again, wanted to see it from the camera's perspective, wanted to see what the gate had captured. Curiosity outweighed the schedule. Yes, the director said. Or nodded. Or waved his hand. The specific gesture is lost. The answer is not. The soundstage did not have a screening room. The soundstage had a monitor. A small monitor, a television, really, a black and white television set with a screen maybe 12 inches diagonal, mounted on a rolling cart with a cable that connected to a playback device that connected to a telecine, a machine that transfers film images to video signal, that takes the chemical memory of the film and converts it to the electronic memory of the screen. The telecine was not fast. The telecine required the film to be developed or, in this case, the telecine could show a rough image. An ungraded, unprocessed, raw transfer from the negative to the screen. The operator took the magazine to the telecine. The telecine was in a small room adjacent to the soundstage, a room that my father described based on what the man described based on what Jerry described, small, dark, equipment on metal shelves, the smell of chemicals and warm electronics, the smell of film. The operator opened the magazine in the dark room, a bag, a changing bag, the black fabric bag that allows a man's hands to work with film in daylight without exposing the film to light, the blind surgery of the film trade. The operator's hands went into the bag.
The operator's hands found the film. The operator's hands loaded the film onto the telecine. My father told me this part in his workshop. He was holding a wrench. A socket wrench, the kind with the ratchet, the kind that clicks when you turn it, the mechanical sound of teeth engaging and releasing, the sound of precise increments. My father was holding the wrench and not using it. The wrench was in his hand the way a pen is in a writer's hand when the writer is thinking, not writing, thinking, the tool present but the tool idle, the tool waiting for the thought to become the action. The guy, the one who told me, he said Jerry described the room like it was a church, my father said. Small. Dark. A screen at the end. People sitting in the dark waiting to see something. My father turned the wrench. 1 click. 2 clicks. Jerry said there were maybe 8 people in the room. The director. The coordinator. The operator. Bruce. Jerry. 3 or 4 crew members who had followed. 8 people in a dark room the size of a closet watching a 12-inch screen. My father put the wrench down. Picked up a different wrench. A smaller one. The selection was automatic, the hand choosing the tool the way the mouth chooses the word, without conscious decision, the muscle memory of 30 years of holding wrenches selecting the right wrench for the right bolt. And the thing on the screen, my father paused. The wrench stopped. The ratchet was silent. The thing on the screen was the thing that Jerry carried for 30 years. We'll come back to that workshop. Right now we're in a dark room on a soundstage in Hong Kong, and 8 people are watching a 12-inch screen. The telecine played the film. The image was rough. Black and white, the monitor couldn't show color, or the transfer was monochrome, or the processing was incomplete. The details here are uncertain. What is certain is, the image showed 2 men on a concrete floor. The image showed Bruce on his mark. The image showed Jerry raising his hands. The image showed the director's hand come down. The image showed Bruce move. 8 people in a dark room watched Bruce move on a 12-inch screen and the room was silent the way the soundstage had been silent after the first hit, the same silence, the same hungry shock, the same suspension of breath. 8 people had seen the event in person, in the room, in the light, in the dimensional reality of bodies in space. And now 8 people were seeing the event again, reduced to a 12-inch rectangle, compressed to 2 dimensions, stripped of color and sound and temperature and the smell of warm concrete and the taste of the loaded air. The reduction made it clearer. This is what Jerry said. This is what traveled through the chain. The reduction, the smallness of the screen, the absence of color, the flatness of the image, the reduction removed the noise. The reduction removed everything that was not the movement. On the soundstage, in person, the event was surrounded by context, the lights, the crew, the equipment, the walls, the ceiling, the sound, the heat, the 20 bodies breathing. On the screen, the event was alone. 2 men. Concrete. Movement. The palm strike. On the screen, the palm strike was visible. In person, the palm strike had been a blur. Bruce moved and Jerry's body received the movement and the space between the moving and the receiving was unmeasurable. On the screen, the palm strike was visible because the screen slowed the event. Not literally, the telecine was playing at normal speed. But the eye could process the screen in a way the eye couldn't process the room because the screen was smaller and the smaller frame gave the eye less to track and the less to track gave the brain more time to process and the more time was the slowing. 8 people saw the palm leave Bruce's hip. 8 people saw the palm cross the 7 feet. 8 people saw the palm hit Jerry's chest. 8 people saw Jerry's feet leave the floor.
And 8 people saw something that nobody had seen in person, not Jerry, not the coordinator, not the director, not the crew.
Something that was only visible on the screen.
Something that the camera had seen and the human eyes had missed.
Bruce's feet. Bruce's feet during the palm strike. The feet on the concrete. The seventh pivot. The post in the ground.
8 people had been watching Bruce's hands, because the hands were the weapon, the hands were the story, the hands were the visible part of the event. Nobody had been watching Bruce's feet because the feet were on the floor, and the floor is the place you don't look when a man is hitting another man with his hands. The camera had been looking at the floor. The camera was on the dolly, positioned at waist height, angled slightly down. The frame included both men from the waist down.
The frame included the feet.
The frame included the concrete. The frame included the thing that nobody had seen.
Bruce's feet did not move.
The palm strike, the full extension, the hip rotation, the force traveling from foot to palm, the palm strike that sent a 220-pound man 6 feet through the air. During the entire palm strike, Bruce's feet did not move.
Not barely moved. Not moved slightly. Did not move.
The right foot, the seventh pivot foot, the edited foot, the foot that connected the wire to the generator, the right foot stayed on the concrete.
The toes stayed.
The ball stayed. The heel stayed.
The ankle didn't rotate. The knee didn't shift.
The foot was on the concrete, and the foot was the concrete, the same hardness, the same permanence, the same refusal to move. The left foot, the back foot, the stabilizer, the anchor, the left foot stayed on the concrete.
Same stillness. Same permanence. Same refusal. 2 feet. 2 points of contact. 0 movement.
A 138-pound man generated enough force to send a 220-pound man 6 feet through the air, and the 138-pound man's feet didn't move.
The force didn't come from the feet. Wait. The force came through the feet.
The floor was the generator.
The feet were the connection. But the feet didn't move because the feet didn't need to move.
The generator was the floor, and the floor doesn't move. The wire was the body, and the body transmitted the force without losing its position, the way a wire transmits electricity without leaving the wall. The feet stayed because the feet were the ground.
The feet were the origin.
The feet were the fixed point around which the rest of the body, the hips, the torso, the shoulder, the arm, the palm, rotated. Everything above the feet moved.
The feet were the only thing that didn't. The still point.
The still point at the center of a spinning thing.
The axle of a wheel.
The eye of a storm.
The hinge of a door. The thing that doesn't move so that other things can. Bruce's feet were the still point.
8 people in a dark room saw the still point on a 12-inch screen, and the seeing was the thing that Jerry carried for 30 years.
Not the force. Not the speed. Not the flight. Not the concrete.
Not the 8 feet or the 6 feet or the 80% or the bullet or the bomb.
The feet. The feet that didn't move. The feet that didn't need to move. The feet that were the floor. Jerry sat on the floor. Not fell. Not collapsed. Not crumpled. Saturday.
The way a man sits when the standing is over and the sitting is a choice, and the choice is, I need the floor.
I need the thing that hit me to hold me. I need the concrete. This was after the second viewing.
They watched the film twice. The first viewing was the one I described, the 8 people in the dark room, the 12-inch screen, the palm strike visible for the first time, the feet that didn't move. The first viewing ended and the room was silent, and the silence lasted, Jerry estimated, maybe 10 seconds. 10 seconds of 8 people processing what they'd seen. Then the coordinator said, again. Not a request. A statement. The coordinator reached for the telecine controls and rewound the film, and the rewinding made a sound, the mechanical whirring of film traveling backward through the gate, the reverse of time, the undoing of the event. The film rewound and the coordinator pressed play and the event happened again. The second viewing was different. The second viewing, Jerry didn't watch Bruce's hands. Jerry didn't watch Jerry's flight. Jerry didn't watch the landing. Jerry watched Bruce's face. Bruce's face during the palm strike. The first viewing, Jerry had been looking at the feet. Everyone had been looking at the feet because the feet were the revelation, the feet were the thing the eyes had missed and the camera had found. But the face was the other thing. The face was the thing behind the thing. Bruce's face during the palm strike was, Jerry searched for the word again, the way Jerry always searched for the words always inadequate, the words always smaller than the event they were trying to carry. Bruce's face was empty. Empty. Not blank. Not neutral. Not expressionless. Empty. The way a room is empty when the furniture has been removed and the walls are bare and the space is available for anything because nothing is occupying it. Bruce's face during the palm strike was a room with no furniture. No effort. No strain. No grimace. No war cry. No visible engagement of the muscles that the face uses to express exertion, the jaw clenching, the brow furrowing, the lips tightening, the face that every fighter Jerry had ever worked with made when the fighter was delivering maximum force. Bruce's face was delivering maximum force and Bruce's face was empty. The palm was at 80%. The body was at 80%. The feet were at 0% movement. And the face was at 0% expression. The face was not participating in the strike. The face was not involved. The face was watching. Watching. Bruce's face was watching the palm strike happen the way a spectator watches a performance. Detached. Observant. Interested but not engaged. The face was Bruce watching himself hit Jerry, and the watching was, Jerry said, the scariest part. Not the force. Not the flight. Not the concrete. The watching. Because the watching meant that Bruce was separate from the strike. The strike was happening and Bruce was observing the strike, and the observing meant that Bruce was not consumed by the strike, was not lost in the strike, was not the strike. Bruce was the man who contained the strike. The way a glass contains water, the glass is not the water, the glass holds the water, and the glass can decide to pour. Bruce was the glass. The strike was the water. And the face, the empty face, the watching face, the face was the hand on the glass, deciding how much to pour. 80% was a decision. Not a limit. Not a ceiling. Not the best Bruce could do. 80% was a measured portion. A chosen amount. A deliberate fraction of a whole that the face was watching and the mind behind the face was controlling, and the control was the thing. The control was the real thing. The control was what Jerry carried for 30 years, more than the force, more than the flight, more than the feet that didn't move. The control. A man who hits you with everything he has is frightening. A man who hits you with 80% of what he has and watches himself do it is something else. Something that Jerry didn't have a word for. Something that the chain of telling Jerry to the man to my father to me, couldn't carry without losing. the way you can't carry water in your hands without losing some between the fingers.
The second viewing ended. The coordinator turned off the telecine. The screen went dark.
The 12 inches of truth became 12 inches of nothing. 8 people in a dark room with the afterimage of Bruce's empty face burning in the space where the screen had been.
And Jerry sat on the floor.
Jerry sat on the floor of the telecine room, the small, dark room with the equipment on metal shelves and the smell of chemicals and warm electronics, and Jerry sat there for what the man who told my father described as a while.
A while.
The imprecise measure.
The elastic duration that stretches to fit the event it's containing. A while could be 2 minutes. A while could be 10. The chain didn't preserve the number.
The chain preserved the sitting.
Jerry sat on the floor and the floor was
cool, not concrete this time. The telecine room had a different floor, tile or linoleum, something smooth and cold, the kind of floor that institutional rooms have, the kind of floor that doesn't pretend to be anything other than a surface. Jerry sat on the surface and the surface held him, and the holding was the same as the concrete's holding, indifferent, structural, the floor doing its job without caring about the man it was doing its job for.
The 8 people left the room. Most of them. The director left. The crew members left. The coordinator left.
The operator left. The operator had work. The operator had to unload the telecine, had to secure the film, had to return the magazine to the camera, had to do the mechanical things that the mechanical man does when the mechanical event is over.
Bruce stayed.
Bruce was in the doorway of the telecine room.
Jerry was on the floor. Bruce was standing. The doorway framed Bruce, the light from the soundstage behind him, the tungsten warmth behind him, the cable and concrete world behind him, and Bruce in the frame of the door like a photograph in a frame, the body outlined by light, the face in shadow because the telecine room was dark and the face was facing the dark. Bruce stayed in the doorway. Jerry sat on the floor.
The 2 men were in the room, and the room was small and the room was dark, and the room was the quietest place on the soundstage because the room was designed for watching, and watching requires quiet.
Bruce spoke. Not to the room. Not to the air. To Jerry. Bruce spoke to Jerry, and the speaking was in English, and the English was, Jerry told the man told my father, the English was careful. Careful.
The word that describes a person who was choosing each word the way Bruce chose each fragment on the soundstage, testing it, adjusting it, making sure it was the right word in the right position at the right speed. Bruce said, and this came through 4 hands, Bruce to Jerry to the man to my father to me, 4 hands, and each hand held the words and each hand let some of the words go, and the words I'm giving you were the words that all 4 hands kept.
Are you hurt?
2 words.
The same concern as the face on the soundstage. The same responsibility.
The same my fault compressed into a question instead of a statement.
Jerry said, no. 1 word. Not a lie, Jerry was not hurt.
Jerry's back was bruised.
Jerry's shoulder was purple. Jerry's chest was humming. But Jerry was not hurt. Hurt, in Jerry's professional vocabulary, meant, cannot work. Jerry could work. Jerry was sitting on a floor in a dark room because Jerry was processing, not because Jerry was broken. No, Jerry said. Bruce nodded.
The nod was in shadow. Jerry saw the outline of the nod, the chin dropping, the chin rising, the acknowledgement.
Then Bruce said the second thing. The second sentence.
The sentence that Jerry carried longer than the feet, longer than the face, longer than the force. The sentence that was the seed of the reel's disappearance. The sentence that explained, 30 years early, why the film was never released.
Bruce said, That film, don't show it. 4 words. A statement, not a request. Not "I'd prefer if you didn't" or "could we keep this between us" or any of the diplomatic formulations that a star uses when a star wants something from a crew member. 4 words. Direct. The same efficiency as the body. The same economy as the palm strike. No wasted motion in the mouth. That film, don't show it. Jerry heard the 4 words. Jerry was sitting on the floor in the dark looking up at Bruce in the doorway, and the 4 words came down from the doorway to the floor the way the tungsten heat came down from the ceiling to the concrete, vertically. With gravity, with the weight of a thing that falls because falling is what the thing does. Jerry didn't ask why. Jerry told the man 30 years later, in a bar, after a 16-hour shoot day. Jerry told the man that he didn't ask why because he already knew why. Jerry knew why the moment Bruce said it. Jerry knew because Jerry had seen the face. The empty face. The watching face. The face that was separate from the strike. The face that was the glass and the strike was the water, and the face was deciding how much to pour. The film showed the control. The film showed that Bruce Lee could hit a man with 80% of his force and watch himself do it. The film showed that the remaining 20% was a choice. The film showed that Bruce could pour more water from the glass. The film showed that the glass was not empty. The film showed what Bruce was. Not what Bruce could do. Every film showed what Bruce could do. Every film showed the kicks and the punches and the speed and the fights and the bodies falling and the choreography that looked like violence. Every film showed the performance. The performance was the product. The performance was the thing that filled cinemas and sold tickets and built the career that put Bruce on a soundstage in Hong Kong with a stuntman named Jerry and a camera and a fresh magazine. This film didn't show the performance. This film showed the capacity. The capacity is the thing behind the performance. The capacity is the reservoir that the performance draws from. The capacity is the full glass. And the full glass, the sight of the full glass, the knowledge that the glass contains more than what's being poured. The full glass is not entertainment. The full glass is not cinema. The full glass is private. Bruce wanted the capacity to stay private. Bruce wanted the world to see what he chose to show: the 80%, the 50%, the 10% that films required, the calibrated fractions that the camera turned into entertainment, and the entertainment turned into mythology, and the mythology turned into Bruce Lee. Bruce wanted the mythology. Bruce built the mythology. Bruce was the architect of the mythology. But the mythology was the performance, not the capacity. The capacity was the feet that didn't move. The capacity was the face that was empty. The capacity was the 80% that felt like more than the 100%. The capacity was the thing that the mythology pointed at but never showed, the way a shadow points at a body but is not the body. The film showed the body. Bruce wanted the shadow. That film, don't show it. Jerry, on the floor, in the dark, looking up at the outline of Bruce Lee in a doorway. Okay. 1 word. The contract. The second contract between 2 bodies. The first was Jerry's hands coming up, the signal that said I'm ready. The second was Jerry's voice going out, the word that said I'll keep it. Bruce nodded again. The chin dropped. The chin rose. The shadow moved. Bruce left the doorway. Bruce walked back onto the soundstage. Jerry heard the footsteps, and this one time, Jerry heard the footsteps. The feet on the concrete. The sound. Faint, quiet, almost not there, but there.
Bruce was walking back to the center of the soundstage, and the walking was different from the walking that Jerry had seen at 7:15 that morning, the silent walking, the walking that the concrete didn't know about. This walking had sound. This walking had weight. This walking was a man returning from a conversation that had cost him something, not energy, not effort, something else. The conversation had cost Bruce a piece of the privacy, and the cost was in the feet, and the feet were heavier, and the heavier feet made sound on the concrete, and the sound was the price. Jerry heard Bruce walk away. Jerry stayed on the floor. The man who told my father this story was not Jerry. I've said this. I need to say it again because what comes next depends on the distance between the event and the telling. The distance is Bruce to Jerry on a soundstage. Jerry to a man in a bar, 30 years later. The man to my father in a kitchen. My father to me in a workshop, years after that. 4 hands. The distance between the soundstage and this video is 4 hands. Each hand held the story. Each hand shaped the story, not deliberately, not with the intention of changing it, but with the inevitable pressure that human memory applies to human events. Memory is not a recording. Memory is a retelling. And each retelling is a compression, the event shrinking to fit the container of the mind, the details that matter staying and the details that don't matter falling away, and the definition of matter being different for each hand. Jerry's hand kept the feet. Jerry's hand kept the face. Jerry's hand kept that film, don't show it. Jerry's hand kept the concrete and the 80% and the 7 feet and the 12-inch screen. Jerry's hand kept these things because these things mattered to Jerry. These things were the stones that the river shaped, round, smooth, specific, the things that survived the current. The man's hand kept what Jerry gave him. The man's hand kept the shape of the stones. But the man's hand was a different river, a different current, a different speed, a different set of rocks on the bottom, and the man's hand reshaped the stones slightly. Added a curve here. Smoothed an edge there. The story that left the man's hand was the story that entered the man's hand, minus the edges that the man's current wore away. My father's hand kept what the man gave him. My father held the story in his kitchen, in his workshop, in the places where my father held things, the wrench, the cup, the steering wheel, the tools that my father's hands knew. My father held the story the way my father held a tool, firmly, practically, with the grip of a man who uses things and doesn't display them. My father didn't display the story. My father used the story. My father used it to show me something about what a body can do when the body is the instrument and the instrument is tuned and the tuning is a life's work. My hand is the 4th hand. My hand is holding the story now. My hand is shaping it. I know this, I accept this, I am aware that the story in my hand is not the story that was on the soundstage. The story in my hand is 4 compressions removed from the event. 4 rivers. 4 currents. 4 sets of edges worn away. What's left is what you've heard. The feet. The face. The palm. The control. The 4 words. The real. The floor. I can't verify the distance, 8 feet or 6 feet or 10 feet. The number came through 4 hands, and numbers are the first things that hands drop because numbers are heavy and smooth and they slip. I can verify that my father told it the same way twice. I can verify that my father paused in the same place both times, at the feet didn't move, my father paused, and the pausing was the emphasis, the pausing was my father's hand tightening on the stone that mattered most. The feet that didn't move. I believe the feet. I believe the face. I believe the 80%. I believe that film, don't show it. I believe these things because my Father's hands held them the same way twice, and the things that a man's hands hold the same way twice are the things the man trusts, and the things a man trusts are the things that are closest to the truth, and the truth is what I'm trying to give you, even though the truth has been through 4 hands and 4 hands changed the truth, and the changed truth is still truth, the way a river changes a stone and the changed stone is still a stone. The real. What happened to the real? This is the part that the chain carries least clearly. This is the part where the 4 hands lose the most. The edges here are the softest. The stones here are the smoothest. The current here was the strongest. What Jerry told the man 30 years after the soundstage, in a bar, after a 16-hour day, what Jerry told the man about the reel was, the reel stayed on the soundstage. The operator secured it. The operator put the film, the exposed, unprocessed, chemical memory-bearing strip of 16 mm cellulose, into a can. A film can. A round metal container with a lid that presses on and a label that goes on the lid, and the label says what's inside, and what's inside is time. Captured time. Frozen time. Time stored in silver halide crystals, waiting to be developed, waiting to be fixed, waiting to be made permanent. The operator put the can with the other cans. The day's footage. The scheduled takes and the unscheduled take, the lies and the truth, all in cans, all on a shelf, all waiting for the lab. Jerry didn't know what happened to the can after that. Jerry left the soundstage that evening. Jerry went back to his hotel. Jerry took a shower, and in the shower, Jerry told the man, the water hit the bruise on his left shoulder, and the bruise told the water about the concrete, and the water carried the concrete's message down Jerry's back and into the drain, and the drain took the message away, and the message was gone, but the bruise stayed, and the bruise stayed for 2 weeks, and the 2 weeks were the last 2 weeks of Jerry's contract in Hong Kong. Jerry left Hong Kong 2 weeks later. Jerry never went back to that soundstage. Jerry never saw the reel again. Jerry never saw Bruce again. Jerry worked on other films in other countries: Rome, London, Madrid, Los Angeles, a career of soundstages and concrete and breakaway tables and horses and boxing gloves, and the professional absorption of force that was Jerry's trade, Jerry's skill, Jerry's gift to the camera. And Jerry kept the contract. That film, don't show it. Okay. Jerry kept the okay. Jerry kept it for 30 years. 30 years of not telling the story, not to producers, not to directors, not to other stuntmen, not to the journalists who called after Bruce died in 1973, not to the documentarians who came looking for anyone who had worked with Bruce, not to the biographers or the historians or the fans. 30 years of silence. Jerry broke the silence in a bar. Jerry broke it because the man told my father, and my father told me. Jerry broke it because the man said something. The man said something about Bruce Lee that was wrong. Not factually wrong, the man wasn't quoting a wrong date or a wrong name or a wrong number. The man said something about Bruce Lee that was experientially wrong. The man said something about what it was like to be hit by Bruce Lee, and the something was wrong because the man had never been hit by Bruce Lee, and the man was guessing, and the guess was wrong. Jerry heard the wrong guess. Jerry's body heard the wrong guess. And Jerry's body, the body that had been on the concrete, the body that had flown 8 feet, the body that had felt the floor hit it through a man who was a wire, Jerry's body rejected the wrong guess the way a body rejects a foreign object. The body pushed back. The body said, no. That's not what it was. That's not what it was like. You don't know. I know. And Jerry told. Jerry opened the 30 years and let the story out, and the story came out in a bar after a 16-hour day, and the story was tired, and the story was old, and the story had been in the dark for 30 years, the same dark as the telecine room, The same small dark space where things are stored and not shown, and the story came into the light of a bar and the light was fluorescent, and the fluorescent light is not kind to old stories, but the story didn't need kindness, the story needed telling.
And Jerry told it. The man listened.
The man held the story in his hands, the third hands, the hands between Jerry's hands and my father's hands, and the man carried the story out of the bar and into the world, and the world eventually brought the story to my father's kitchen.
And the reel? The reel is in a can.
Or the reel was in a can.
The can is on a shelf.
Or the can was on a shelf.
The shelf is in a building.
Or the shelf was in a building.
The building is in Hong Kong.
Or the building was in Hong Kong.
The tense is uncertain. The location is uncertain. The existence is uncertain. What is certain?
A camera recorded Bruce Lee hitting a stuntman named Jerry with an open palm at 80% of his capacity on a soundstage in Hong Kong on a morning that started with choreography and ended with truth.
The camera recorded the feet that didn't move. The camera recorded the face that was empty.
The camera recorded the 80%.
The camera recorded the 6 feet of flight and the concrete landing and the silence of 20 people and the 4 words in the doorway and the shadow and the nod. The camera recorded all of it. And Bruce said, "Don't show it." And Jerry said, "Okay." And the reel went into a can and the can went onto a shelf and the shelf held the can the way the concrete held Jerry, without caring, without choosing, without knowing that the thing it was holding was a piece of a man who was an instrument, and the instrument was tuned to a frequency that the world has heard the echo of but never the source. The echo is the films. The echo is the mythology. The echo is what Bruce chose to show. The source is on a reel. The reel is in a can. The can is on a shelf. Somewhere. There's a floor in Hong Kong that remembers. Not the concrete, concrete doesn't remember. Concrete holds weight and reflects heat and says its name when you hit it, and the name is always the same, hard. Concrete doesn't remember. But there's a floor in Hong Kong where a man stood with his feet planted and his face empty and his right hand open, and his body was a wire, and the wire carried the generator's current, and the current went through the palm and through the door and through the chest of a man named Jerry who weighed 220 pounds, and the 220 pounds flew 6 feet, and the 6 feet ended on concrete, and the concrete said its name. There's a floor that was the generator. There's a floor that was the source. And somewhere, in a can, on a shelf, in a building that might still be standing, there's a reel of 16mm film that saw what the floor did. My father told me this story twice. Both times, he paused at the feet. Both times, he held the wrench. Both times, the wrench was the wrong wrench, the wrench was the one he'd picked up before the story started, and the wrench was for the wrong bolt, and my father knew it was the wrong wrench, but my father didn't put it down because putting it down would mean stopping, and stopping would mean the story would stop, and the story didn't want to stop. The story wanted to be told. My father told it. The way it was given to him. Through 4 hands. Each hand holding what it could. Each hand losing what it couldn't. The feet stayed. The face stayed. The 4 words stayed. The floor stayed. The reel, I don't know where the reel is. I don't know if the reel still exists. I don't know if the silver halide crystals have degraded, if the cellulose has shrunk, if the image has faded, if the moment has returned to the chemistry from which it was captured. I don't know if the can is on a shelf or in a landfill or in the collection of a man who doesn't know what he has. I know that a stuntman named Jerry stood on a soundstage in Hong Kong and raised his hands, and a man who weighed 138 pounds opened a door in his chest and sent him 6 feet through the air, and the camera saw it, and the camera remembered, and the camera's memory went into a can, and the can went somewhere. I know that my father told it the same way twice. I know that the feet didn't move. Take it as a story. That's how it was given to me. My father's workshop was a garage. Not a garage that had been converted into a workshop, a garage that had failed at being a garage and succeeded at being a workshop by accident, the way some rooms find their purpose not through design but through accumulation. The car had been parked in the garage once, years ago, and then the car had been replaced by a workbench, and the workbench had been joined by a shelf, and the shelf had been joined by a pegboard, and the pegboard had been joined by tools, and the tools had been joined by more tools, and eventually the tools had occupied the space so completely that the car couldn't fit, and the car lived in the driveway, and the garage lived as a workshop, and nobody argued with the arrangement. The workbench was plywood. I mention this because the plywood is the connection. The plywood on the workbench in my father's workshop was the plywood that should have been on the floor of the soundstage in Hong Kong. Plywood over concrete. The industry standard. The layer between the body and the hard thing that catches the body. My father's workbench had what Jerry's soundstage didn't, and I don't know if my father noticed the symmetry, and I didn't notice it until I was writing this, and the noticing is the kind of noticing that makes you pause and look at the thing you've been standing on and ask, what's under this? What's the layer I'm not seeing? My father told me the story in the workshop. The first time was in autumn. I know it was autumn because the garage door was half open and the air coming through was the autumn air, cool but not cold. The air that carries the smell of things ending and things beginning, the transitional air, the air that doesn't commit to a temperature. The half-open door let in the light, and the light was the late afternoon light that arrives in autumn at an angle that summer doesn't know, low, gold, the light that enters a room horizontally instead of vertically, the light that finds the dust in the air and makes the dust visible, and the visible dust is the signature of the season. My father was at the workbench. He was working on something, I don't remember what. A machine. A mechanism. Something with bolts and bearings and the greasy specificity of mechanical things. My father's hands were on the mechanism, and the mechanism was on the plywood, and the plywood was on the workbench, and the workbench was on the concrete, and the concrete was the floor of the garage. Concrete. The floor of my father's workshop was concrete. The same material. The same hardness. The same indifference. And I stood on it in my shoes, and my father stood on it in his boots, and the concrete held us both, and the concrete didn't care about us the way the concrete on the soundstage didn't care about Jerry. My father picked up the wrench. The socket wrench. The ratchet kind. The one that clicks. And my father started the story without starting the story, the way my father started all stories, which was, from the middle. My father didn't believe in beginnings. My father believed in middles. My father believed that you start where the engine is, not where the key is. The key is for people who need permission. The engine is for people who need to move. A guy I know told me a thing about Bruce Lee, my father said. That was the beginning. That was the key. But the key was already in the engine, and the engine was already running, and the running was the middle. A stuntman, my father said. Big guy. Wrestler. Worked in Hong Kong in the early 70s. Name was Jerry. My father said the name the way my father said all names, once, clearly, and then never again. The name was a label. The label went on the jar. The jar held the story. My father didn't need the label after it was on the jar. The stuntman told a guy I worked with, you don't know him, the stuntman told this guy about a day on a soundstage. One day. Maybe 5 hours. He'd been carrying it for 30 years, and he told it in a bar, and my guy heard it, and my guy told me. My father clicked the wrench. One click. The ratchet engaging. The sound of precise increment. And the thing about it, the thing that my guy said, the stuntman said, the thing was the feet. My father looked up from the mechanism. Looked at me. My father's eyes were the eyes of a man who had worked with his hands for 40 years, and the 40 years were in the eyes, not tiredness, not age, knowledge. The knowledge that comes from holding things and turning things and feeling the resistance and the give, and the point where the resistance becomes the give and the give is the thing working. The feet didn't move, my father said. And my father told me the story. My father told me the story, and I stood on the concrete in my father's workshop and I listened. I stood on the concrete the way Jerry stood on the concrete, not knowing that the concrete mattered, not knowing that the floor was part of the story, not knowing that what was under my feet was connected to what was under Jerry's feet, and both were connected to what was under Bruce's feet, and all of it, all the concrete, all the floors, all the surfaces that hold bodies while bodies do things to other bodies, all of it was the generator. The floor was the generator. I didn't understand this the first time my father told the story. The first time, I heard the story, as a sequence of events, a narrative, a thing with a beginning, the soundstage at 6 a.m., and a middle, the palm strike, the flight, the concrete, and an end, the reel in a can, the can on a shelf, the shelf somewhere. I heard the story the way you hear a story, from outside, as a listener, as the fifth hand receiving the stones that four hands had shaped. The second time, I understood. The second time was months later. Same workshop. Same concrete. Same workbench. Same plywood on the workbench. Different season, winter now, the garage door closed, the air inside warmer than the air outside, the workshop a room that held its heat the way a body holds its heat, reluctantly, temporarily, against the thermodynamic certainty that all heat leaves all bodies eventually. My father was at the workbench again. Different mechanism. Same hands. Same boots on the same concrete. Same wrench, not the same wrench, a different wrench, but the same type, the same ratchet, the same click. My father's wrenches were interchangeable in the way that my father's stories were not. The wrenches all did the same thing, the stories each did a different thing, and this story did a specific thing, and the specific thing it did was, it changed the way I thought about floors. I know that sounds small. I know that sounds like an insufficient takeaway from a story about Bruce Lee hitting a stuntman with an open palm on a soundstage in Hong Kong and sending the stuntman 6 feet through the air at 80% of his capacity while his feet didn't move and his face was empty. I know that the dramatic takeaway should be about the force. About the speed. About the control. About the mythology and the capacity and the shadow and the body and the reel and the can on the shelf somewhere. But the takeaway was the floor. The floor was the generator. Bruce's force came from the floor. Not from the muscles were the wire. Not from the technique was the circuit. Not from the will was the switch. The force came from the floor. The floor that was concrete. The floor that was hard. The floor that said its name when you hit it and the name was always the same. The floor that didn't care. The floor that held everything that stood on it without preference, without judgment, without the selectivity that human hands bring to the things they hold. The floor held everything. And Bruce knew how to ask the floor for what the floor held. That's the takeaway. That's the thing. Bruce knew how to ask the floor. Bruce's feet, the feet that didn't move, the feet that were the concrete, the feet that were the still point. Bruce's feet knew how to connect to the floor and ask the floor for its force, and the floor gave the force because the floor has the force and the floor always has the force, and the force is the same force that holds up buildings and bridges and mountains and continents. The force of the ground. The force of the earth.
The force that is always there, under everything, holding everything, and nobody asks for it because nobody knows how to ask.
Bruce knew how to ask. That's what the stuntman felt. That's what the floor hit me meant. That's what the 8 feet meant and the 6 feet meant and the 80% meant. The force that went through Bruce's palm was not Bruce's force. The force was the floor's force. Bruce borrowed it. Bruce channeled it. Bruce was the wire and the floor was the generator and the palm was the terminal and Jerry's chest was the load and the circuit was complete and the circuit delivered the charge and the charge was the floor's charge, not Bruce's. Bruce was 138 pounds. The floor was the earth. The earth weighs 6 sextillion tons. Bruce was the wire. The floor was the generator. And the generator has more power than any wire can carry, and Bruce carried more of it than any wire before or since, and the carrying was visible on a 12-inch screen in a dark room on a soundstage in Hong Kong, and 8 people saw it, and one of them said don't show it, and one of them said okay, and the rest of them lived with the seeing. This is what I understood the second time. This is what the concrete under my feet in my father's workshop told me, not in words, not in sound, not in the language that concrete uses when a body hits it. In the language that concrete uses when a body stands on it. The quiet language. The holding language. The language that says, I am here. I have always been here. I will always be here. And if you learn to ask me, I will give you what I have. My father didn't tell me this. My father told me the story. The story told me this. The story came through 4 hands, and the hands shaped the story, and the story shaped me, and the shaping was the floor telling me about the floor through the story of a man who knew the floor. I stood in my father's workshop on the concrete and I thought about the floor, and my father clicked the wrench, and the clicking was the sound of precise increments, and the precise increments were the story's music, the tick, tick, tick of a thing being tightened, a thing being secured, a thing being held in place by the pressure of a tool in a hand that knows how to apply pressure. My father finished the mechanism. Set the wrench down. Wiped his hands on the rag that lived on the corner of the workbench, the gray rag, the permanent rag, the rag that was never clean and never dirty, the rag that existed in the state between clean and dirty that rags achieve when they are used and used and used, and the use is their purpose and the purpose is the state. My father wiped his hands and looked at me and said, the thing about it is, the guy, the stuntman, he didn't tell the story for 30 years. He sat on it. He kept it. And when he told it in a bar to one guy. One guy. Because the one guy said something wrong and the wrongness pulled the story out. My father folded the rag. Set it on the corner. The corner of the workbench. The plywood. The layer between the thing and the hard thing. That's how stories work, my father said. They don't come out when you ask. They come out when someone says the wrong thing and the right thing has to answer. My father was not a philosopher. My father was a mechanic. My father knew engines and transmissions and the physical laws that govern the movement of metal inside metal. My father did not deal in abstractions. My father dealt in torque. But my father knew stories. My father knew stories the way my father knew engines, from the inside, from the hands, from the sound. My father knew when a story was running clean and when a story was knocking and when a story needed a part replaced and when a story was done and the done was not the stopping but the completing, the arriving, the moment when all the parts are in the right place and the pressure is right and the timing is right and the thing works. The feet, my father said again. The feet didn't move. My father looked at the floor. My father looked at the concrete. My father's boots were on the concrete and the concrete was holding my father the way the concrete had held Bruce, and the holding was the same floor, different building, different country, different decade, the same holding. The same indifferent, structural, permanent holding of a body by a surface that doesn't know the body and doesn't need to know the body and holds the body anyway because holding is what the surface does. The feet didn't move, my father said. And the guy flew 6 feet. My father shook his head. Not the shake of disbelief. The shake of recognition. The shake that a mechanic makes when a mechanic sees a piece of engineering that the mechanic didn't think was possible, and the seeing changes the mechanic's understanding of what engineering is. 6 feet, my father said. From a standing start. With an open hand. My father picked up the rag again. Not to use. To hold. The way my father held the wrench, the tool present, the tool idle, the tool waiting. The rag in my father's hands was the story in my father's hands. The holding was the same. And nobody's ever seen the film, my father said. The film. The reel. The can. The shelf. The somewhere. Nobody's ever seen it, my father said. Because the guy said don't show it. And the stuntman said okay. And that was that. My father put the rag down. That was that. I want to tell you what I think happened to the reel. I can't tell you what I know happened to the reel because I don't know what happened to the reel. The chain doesn't reach the reel. The chain reaches Bruce saying don't show it and Jerry saying okay and Jerry leaving Hong Kong 2 weeks later and the reel staying behind. The chain ends there. Everything after is speculation, mine, not my father's, not the man's, not Jerry's. Mine. The fifth hand. Here's what I think happened to the reel. I think the reel went into the production's footage. I think the can went on the shelf with the other cans from that day, the scheduled takes, the choreographed takes, the professional takes. I think the label on the can said something neutral, a date, a scene number, a camera angle, the professional shorthand that film productions use to catalog their footage. I think the label did not say Bruce Lee hits Stuntman at 80% with open palm, Stuntman flies 6 feet, feet don't move. The label said something like SC14, angle 3, take 7, and the label was bureaucracy, and bureaucracy is camouflage, and camouflage is how things hide. I think the reel went to the lab with the other reels. I think the lab processed the film, developed it, fixed it, made the latent image permanent, turned the silver halide crystals from possibility to certainty. I think the lab returned the processed film to the production. I think the processed film went into storage, a vault, a shelf, a room in a building in Hong Kong where film productions stored their footage. And I think somebody saw it. Not Jerry, Jerry was gone. Not Bruce, Bruce said don't show it and Bruce's word was the word and the word held. But somebody. A lab technician. An editor. A projectionist. Someone in the chain of film processing, the chain that runs from the camera to the screen, the chain of hands that touches the film before the film touches the audience, someone in that chain saw the reel. And I think the someone didn't know what they were seeing. Not because the image was unclear. The image was sharp, the gate was good, the operator had checked, the focus marks agreed with the floor marks. The image was sharp. The image showed 2 men on concrete. The image showed a palm strike. The image showed a man flying backward. The image showed a man landing. But the image didn't explain itself. The image didn't say this is 80%. The image didn't say the feet didn't move. The image didn't say the face was empty. The image didn't say the floor was the generator.
The image showed what the camera saw, and the camera saw light and shadow and movement, and the camera didn't see the meaning because the camera doesn't see meaning. The camera sees photons, and the photons don't carry meaning. The photons carry information, and the information requires interpretation, and the interpretation requires knowledge, and the knowledge requires experience, and the experience is Jerry's, and Jerry was in another country. The someone who saw the real saw a stunt.
A good stunt. A dramatic stunt. A stunt that looked real because it was real. But the someone didn't know it was real.
The someone thought it was choreography, a well-executed, convincingly performed piece of stunt work, the kind of thing that Hong Kong action cinema was building its reputation on, the kind of thing that happened on soundstages every day.
A man hits a man. A man flies. A man lands. The camera catches it. The film goes in a can. The can goes on a shelf. And the real became invisible. Not hidden. Not locked away. Not placed in a vault with a guard and a combination and a warning sign that says the real thing is in here. Invisible. Lost in the ordinary. Camouflaged by the label that said SC14, Angle 3, Take 7, the bureaucratic shorthand that made the extraordinary look ordinary, that made the truth look like one more lie, that made the real look like every other reel on every other shelf in every other storage room in Hong Kong. The real is somewhere. The real is in a building that used to be a studio, or used to be a warehouse, or used to be a lab, or used to be the place where Hong Kong's film industry stored its memories, the cans and reels and prints and negatives. The physical objects that contained the physical images, that contained the light that bounced off the bodies, that performed the movements that the audiences watched and the audiences believed. The real is in the same building as 1,000 other reels. Maybe 10,000. Maybe 100,000. Hong Kong's film industry produced thousands of films in the 1970s alone, thousands of reels, thousands of cans, thousands of labels, thousands of ordinary moments captured in silver halide and stored in metal and left on shelves in rooms that nobody visits because the digital age has made the physical film obsolete, and the obsolete is the thing that rooms forget. The real is in a room that has forgotten it. And on the reel, if the reel still exists, if the cellulose hasn't shrunk, if the silver hasn't degraded, if the chemistry of capture hasn't reversed into the chemistry of decay, on the reel is an image. The image shows two men on concrete. One man weighs 138 pounds. The other weighs 220. The smaller man's right foot is on the floor in a position that was found on the 7th try after 50 fragments were tested in 20 minutes of editing on a soundstage in Hong Kong under tungsten light on a morning that started with choreography. The smaller man's palm is on the larger man's chest. The larger man's feet are leaving the floor. The smaller man's feet are not. The smaller man's face is empty. The image shows this. The image shows the capacity. The image shows the body behind the shadow. And the image is in a can on a shelf in a room in a building in Hong Kong, and the building is somewhere, and the somewhere is the specific kind of somewhere that means it exists but you can't find it, it's real but you can't see it, it's there but you can't reach it. The way the floor is there. The floor is always there. Under everything. Holding everything. The generator that nobody asks. The source that nobody taps. The force that is always available and almost never used because almost nobody knows how to connect the wire to the generator, and almost nobody knows how to stand on the floor and ask the floor for what the floor has. Bruce knew. Jerry felt. The camera saw. The reel remembered. And the reel is somewhere. I'll tell you one more thing. One more thing that came through the chain. One more stone that four hands held. The man who told my father, the man who heard the story from Jerry in the bar after the 16-hour day, the man told my father one thing that my father told me once and only once. Not twice. Once. The things my father told me twice were the things my father had processed, the things my father had held long enough to shape, the things my father's hands had worn smooth. The things my father told me once were the things my father was still holding, still shaping, still feeling the edges of. This was a thing with edges. The man told my father that Jerry, at the end of the story, at the bottom of the glass, at the hour of the bar where the fluorescent light is the only customer that isn't tired, Jerry said one more thing about the real. One more thing about don't show it. One more thing about the can on the shelf in the room in the building in Hong Kong. Jerry said. He wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting us. Us. Not Jerry. Not the audience. Not the production. Not the industry. Not the mythology. Us. The people who would see it. Bruce said don't show it because the film showed the capacity and the capacity was the full glass and the full glass was the body behind the shadow and the body behind the shadow was a thing that Jerry believed. After 30 years of carrying it, the body behind the shadow was a thing that would change the seeing. Not the understanding. The seeing. The seeing is different from the understanding. The understanding is what happens in the mind, the processing, the interpretation, the placing of the new information into the existing framework. The understanding is intellectual. The understanding is manageable. The understanding is what happens when you hear a story about a man who hit another man with an open palm and sent him 6 feet through the air. The seeing is what happens when you watch it. The seeing is the 12-inch screen in the dark room. The seeing is the feet that don't move. The seeing is the face that's empty. The seeing is the 80% that feels like more than the 100%. The seeing is the moment when the mind stops processing and the eyes take over and the eyes say, I see what this man is. I see the capacity. I see the glass. I see how full the glass is. I see that the glass is always full. I see that every performance I've ever watched was a fraction of the glass. I see that the mythology is the shadow and the body is behind the shadow and the body is this. This. The thing on the reel. The thing that Bruce said don't show. Because the seeing changes you. The seeing doesn't add information to the framework. The seeing replaces the framework. The seeing removes the old understanding and installs a new understanding, and the new understanding is, the scale doesn't go high enough. The scale has never gone high enough. The scale was built for normal and this is not normal, and normal is the only thing the scale knows how to measure, and this is immeasurable. Bruce was protecting us from the immeasurable. Bruce was keeping the glass behind the shadow because the glass in the light is too much. The glass in the light is the thing that changes the seeing. The glass in the light is the thing that makes a man sit on a floor in a dark room and not get up because the getting up requires a framework and the framework has been replaced and the new framework hasn't loaded yet. Jerry sat on the floor because the framework was loading. Bruce said don't show it because the loading is hard. The loading takes time. The loading takes the kind of time that a man sitting on a floor in a dark room has, the quiet time, the processing time, the time between the old understanding and the new understanding. The loading takes the kind of time that 30 years provides. 30 years of carrying. 30 years of the new framework settling into the structure of the mind, finding its place, becoming the understanding instead of replacing the understanding. Jerry loaded for 30 years. Bruce was trying to save us from the loading. He wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting us. My father told me this once. My father didn't tell me this twice because my father was still loading. My father had heard the story and the story had replaced my father's framework and the new framework was settling and the settling was ongoing and the ongoing was the one telling, the single telling, the stone that my father's hands were still shaping when my father gave it to me. I'm still shaping it. I've been shaping it since my father put it in my hands. I've been holding the stone and turning the stone and feeling the edges, and the edges are still there. The stone is not smooth yet. The stone is not shaped yet. The river of my carrying is shorter than the river of my father's carrying, and my father's river is shorter than the man's river, and the man's river is shorter than Jerry's river, and Jerry's river is the longest because Jerry's river started on a soundstage in Hong Kong on a morning that started with choreography and ended with truth. The stone is not smooth. The edges are still there. The edges are the feet that didn't move and the face that was empty and the 80% that was more than the 100% and the 4 words and the 1 word and the floor and the generator and the wire and the palm and the door and the chest and the flight and the concrete and the name. The edges are the story. And I'm giving you the story with the edges still on because the edges are the point. The edges are the thing that cuts. The edges are the reason Jerry sat on the floor and the reason my father paused at the feet and the reason I'm standing in a workshop on concrete telling you about a reel that I've never seen and a man I've never met and a soundstage I've never visited and a floor I've never stood on. The floor I've never stood on is the same floor I'm standing on. The generator is the same generator. The floor under my father's workshop and the floor under the soundstage in Hong Kong and the floor under the bar where Jerry told the man and the floor under the kitchen where the man told my father and the floor under this room where I'm telling you the floor is the same floor. The earth. The ground. The generator. The source. The thing that holds everything and gives to anyone who asks and almost nobody asks. Bruce asked. The floor answered. The camera recorded the answer. The reel is in a can. The can is on a shelf. The shelf is somewhere. And the floor is here. The floor is always here. The camera was already rolling when Bruce hit him. I started with that sentence because the sentence is the stone that traveled the farthest. The sentence is the stone at the bottom of the river, the oldest stone, the smoothest stone, the stone that every hand held and every hand kept and every hand passed to the next hand without losing a grain. The camera was already rolling. The camera is always already rolling. The camera in your phone. The camera in your mind. The camera that memory operates, the gate in the magazine and the focus marks and the geometry of light that the mind uses to capture and store and replay and store again. The camera is always rolling. And the floor is always there. And the generator is always running. And the wire is waiting to be connected. And the palm is waiting to be opened. And the door is waiting to be found. And the reel is in a can on a shelf somewhere in a building in Hong Kong, and the building is somewhere, and the somewhere is the place where the capacity lives, the capacity that Bruce put behind the shadow, the capacity that the mythology points at but doesn't show, the capacity that Jerry felt and the camera saw and the reel remembered and the can holds and the shelf supports and the building contains and the city surrounds and the country includes and the earth, the floor, the generator, the earth underlies. The earth is the capacity. Bruce was the wire. The palm was the proof. And the stuntman, the big man, the wrestler, the man who had been hit by everything and had never been hit by the ground, the stuntman was the witness. The witness sat on the floor for a while. The witness got up. The witness carried the thing for 30 years. The witness told it once. And now I'm telling it to you. The feet didn't move.